Today we dive into the lore of the Dwemer, the mysterious deep elves whose brass cities still thrum with echoes of forgotten equations beneath Tamriel's stone. Once masters of steam, logic, and tonal magic, they vanished in a single blinding moment, leaving only silent machines and unanswered questions in their wake. Their legacy shapes empires, fuels prophecy, and tempts scholars to probe the boundaries between mortality and myth. Now let us begin. Stone remembers in patient silence, and when one bends close enough to the bedrock of Tamriel, it is possible to sense echoes older than spoken memory. The obsidian pillars of Arkentham still murmur in tonal vibrations too low for mortal ears, and across every province weathered cliff faces bear hair-thin traces of chisels long stilled. These are the first footprints of the Dwemer, deep elves whose origin song began far from the caverns they later claimed beneath the pale blossoms of old Elnoth Eye in the Somerset archipelago. In the waning Mare-ethic centuries, a schism tore through Aldmer society, subtle at first, then widening like a river gorge. One branch hewed to ancestral pacts, bowing before the Eight Aedra and the quicksilver whims of more distant spirits. The other, restless and severe, declared that divinity was not to be worshipped but measured, dismantled, and ultimately surpassed. When the fervor of disputation became untenable, the dissidents turned eastward. They gathered their forges, their tonally attuned brass, and their unyielding certainty, and they departed the isles in sleek stone-keel vessels, whose hulls hummed with resonant latticework. The voyage left no surviving charts, but the sagas agree that the white salt spray sparkled against the copper-skinned helms of those who would soon be called Dwemer, the people of the deep. They made landfall first along the broken coasts of Restain, a place of volcanic mesas, ashen storms, and basalt labyrinths riddled with natural vents that breathed warm, mineral-rich air. To the south stretched the fungal forests and salt flats of what would one day become Morrowind's inner sea. To the north, snow-crowned peaks obscured by storms. Here the deep elves found endless corridors of black glass waiting beneath their feet, nacreous seams of ebony and quicksilver, and an underworld whose hollows rang with a kindred music. They quarried not with brute picks, but with calculated sound, humming arrays of fork-like resonators that split basalt as cleanly as parchment. By the dim glow of luminescent moss, their architects traced domes and aqueducts, each measurement governed by principles inscribed upon brass tablets, axioms that insisted every angle, every harmonic interval, carried a metaphysical weight. There, amid piercing fumes and red shadows, rose the first stronghold of Rum-Mash, later softened in chimeric tongues to Nchuanzel, its galleries cooled by rivulets diverted from molten veins, its streets patrolled by spider-limbed clockworks whose facets reflected the forge light like gemmed eyes. In these formative years, the Dwemer took to calling themselves Se Sinestra, hidden originals, a title whispered with disciplined pride. They eschewed ancestor worship altogether, consigning funerary rites to orderly incineration beneath sealed vents. Memory was archived, not venerated. Soul gems inscribed with harmonic identifiers stored brief flickers of counsel from the recently deceased, though even these were consulted sparingly. To outsiders, this seemed a cold heresy, yet within the brass-vaulted lecture halls, it signified a profound commitment to progress unencumbered by blood-bound obligation. If a theorem failed, it was revised. If a machine collapsed, it became alloy for the next design. No Dwemer child was taught to fear divine retribution, only the dull entropy of intellectual complacency. Such convictions demanded a society of intricate balances, and so clan structure evolved along latticed lines, mirroring the alloys of their famed tonal metals. Each citadel answered to a council of 5, a mathematician legate, an understeam provost, a lexicon steward, a siege mechanist, and a tonal architect. The last of these held preeminence, for the architect interpreted the secret language of the earth, translating magma surges and crystal resonance into schematics. Apprenticeship to such a master required decades in subterranean silence, learning to distinguish a half-tone shift in bedrock vibration from leagues away. Ritualized humility tempered ambition. Upon receiving a master's mark, a novice spent a year tending the city's water gears, ensuring aquifers did not foul. Only then were they permitted to sign their first resonant edict and bind it to the central lattice, a living archive of every measurement the deep halls ever recorded. Day and night blended under stone. Bioluminescent fungi provided a cool viridian glow, while polished brass panels reflected furnace blaze through vented shutters, imitating artificial dawns to regulate circadian humors. Agricultural terraces spiraled downward rather than spreading outward, each level nourished by cascades of mineral-rich runoff. Here, sprout bloom legumes, arcane hybrids between ash yam and sea lichen, thrived in inert pumice soil, sustaining citizens alongside fermented kwama oils siphoned from domesticated hive clusters. Dwemer palates prized neutrality of flavor. Bold spice was deemed a distraction from pure sustenance, an opinion their neighbors would later mock as evidence of lifeless taste. Yet no outsider could deny the unmatched efficiency of subterranean husbandry, nor the unspoiled clarity of their recycled air, filtered through towering stacks of brass leaf lichen scrubbers that thrummed like distant choirs. Beyond Resdane, the deep elves ventured in radiating arcs, mapping folds of mountain and magma, as others might record constellations. In Skyrim's frozen heart, they discovered a cavern vast enough to cradle an inland sea. Eons of snowfall had trickled through, limestone, hollowing cathedrals of shimmering azure where giant glowing fungi swayed like undersea kelp. They named this place Faljar Dumdin, the Black Reach, and laid down the first blocks of Alft and upon a natural basalt ridge. Centuries later, travelers from the Nordic tribes would speak of metallic echoes beneath their hearth fires and claim that the mountain itself belched steam spirits. But by then, the Dwemer forges had already been pulsing for generations, hidden beneath leagues of ice and stone. Contact with surface dwellers unfolded unevenly. Snow elf chroniclers, whom later ages would call Falmer, tell of initial trade in crystallized frost salts and luminescent chimes sought by Dwemer acousticians. Yet tensions simmered when the snow elves petitioned for sanctuary after early Nordic incursions. Dwemer logic weighed resource allocation against sentimental refuge, and the verdict massed toward utilitarian rejection. When at last the Falmer plight grew desperate, a faction of deep elves offered succor under draconian terms, total subservience in exchange for sight-mangling toxins that rendered the snow elves blind, yet able to thrive in lightless galleries. That grim bargain lay decades ahead, but even in the Merethic twilight, one could glimpse its seed in the unblinking brass of Dwemer automata, designed to weigh motion and heat alone, indifferent to color, culture, or plea. The first audible crack in Dwemery unity formed with the Rorken, a clan fierce in independence and openly scornful of diplomatic overtures. When the council city of Vardenfell invited Chimer envoys into the Grand Forum to discuss territorial lines, the Rorken Lord rose in protest so abrupt that records claim the central resonator desynchronized by a full quarter tone. His clan, vowing never to share the land with ash-skinned heretics, seized their portable forges and marched west. Legend casts the exodus in soaring romance. On the rub-tinged rim of the West Gash, Clan Rorken's chieftain hoisted his warhammer across the night sky, declaring that wherever it landed, there they would build a kingdom. The fiery arc blazed until dawn, finally striking the dry red sands of present-day Hammerfell. They named the land Volanfell, City of the Hammer, and as they settled its arid valleys, they perfected artesian well engines able to haul vast reservoirs from beneath the desert crust. Their self-made exile preserved a purer orthodoxy, yet fueled interclan rivalry that would never fully heal. While the Rorken shaped desert strongholds, Resdane's remaining citadels intensified their pursuit of theoretical mastery. Earliest among them was the conclave of Dwemer, where lexicon walls reached 40 cubits high and every inch bore inscribed formulae correlating tonal vibrations to etheric stress points in the fabric of Mundus. Dwemer archivists catalogued thousands of mineral harmonics, eventually isolating a crystalline ore of startling purity known to later scholars as a theorem. Discovered first in a secluded cavern east of Markarth, the ore sang beneath even the gentlest chisel. It resisted ordinary smelting, yet when subjected to multi-frequency resonant pressure, it liquefied into a glassy solution capable of accepting complex tonal imprints. From this solution, the deep elves cast gleaming blue ingots that could store near-limitless animus. Experiments produced shards able to turn steam into raw motive force without significant loss, or to channel magicka as though it were sculpted light. The possibility of an Ethereum-powered metropolis consumed the minds of every tonal adept across Skyrim and High Rock. But interstate jealousy erupted, for the ore existed in scant veins guarded by fiercely territorial clans. Amid these achievements, the Dwemer concept of animunculi advanced from crude, piston-driven guardians to near-autonomous constructs. Spider drones etched with filigree patrolled irrigation columns, while sphere sentinels collapsed into rolling forms, accelerating through tunnels on gyroscopic cores. The pinnacle of this craft, the Centurion, towered above mer and man alike, its bronze-hide chest chambers housing pressurized steam bladders that hissed like volcanic vents. Within each construct, the animating principle resided not in sorcery, but in a sheaf of resonant plates, thin as reed paper, inscribed with instructive harmonies. When the plates vibrated in sequence, they whispered algorithmic imperatives into the core lattice, commanding limbs, regulating heat vents, or choosing patrol paths. Thus life emerged not by divine spark, but by mathematically governed resonance, reflecting the Dwemer assurance that consciousness itself could be reduced to perfect pattern. Language mirrored machinery in precision. Dwemery sentence structure, aligned cadence with stress constants, permitting master linguists to embed hidden numeric formulae in casual speech. Carved glyphs curled in fractal loops, stars within polygons, each stroke representing dual phonetic and algebraic value. To outsiders, these sigils seem decorative or even ceremonial, but in truth, every mural doubled as an engineering schematic. When a visiting Chimer scholar once remarked upon the austere beauty of a pillar's inlaid runework, the presiding lexicon steward soberly replied that the art maintained proper vibrational shielding for the steam lines behind the wall. Function, never ornament, guided every choice. Of religion there was officially none. The deep elves conceded the existence of greater powers, for in their view even the Aedra were simply higher dimensional constants in the vast and indifferent equations of Anuel and Padme. Worship, therefore, implied an abdication of merish potential. Dwemer children recited homilies not to gods but to proofs. The principle of invariance, the lattice of harmonized investiture, the 10 axioms of Axel Lan, each served as meditation on how the universe might be altered, given sufficient understanding. Yet remnants of older Oldmere sentiment never fully vanished. In remote galleries, one can find small, sealed alcoves bearing smooth spheroids of electrum, each engraved with the image of an open eye. Scholars debate whether these were mere mnemonic devices, or quiet confessions that even the deep elves could not wholly escape the reflex to personify the unknown. Governance across dispersed citadels required coherence without tyranny. The solution, manifested in the council automatons, stationary brass pillars installed at the heart of every stronghold, linked via sub-terrestrial resonant conduits. Each pillar housed a logic engine able to store edicts as harmonic codices. When a local council reached consensus, they etched the decision into a sound plate and slotted it within the automaton. Tones traveled through stone at the speed of quaking mountains, arriving at sister pillars in distant holds hours or days later, depending on geological medium. Discrepancies triggered automatic call for deliberation. If two pillars received conflicting directives, both entered passive mode until a convocation of architects resolved the contradiction. The system balanced autonomy with unity, though it bred frustration when emergent crises outpaced harmonic deliberation, a flaw that would prove costly in the age of Cagrenac. Cagrenac's birth receives scant record, only that he emerged from a minor subclan in Vardenfell, his childhood spent charting resonant anomalies along lava tubes that pulsed beneath Red Mountain. Apprenticed by 20 to the tonal synod of Nchardak, he eclipsed mentors within a decade. Testimonies describe him as slender, almost fragile, eyes perpetually narrowed in analytic calm. He spoke softly, but carried a tuning fork of dark ether glass, with which he punctuated points by striking nearby stone, causing lingering chords only he seemed able to decipher. Under his guidance, the schema of tonal manipulation expanded from applied physics into metaphysical siegecraft. If a resonant wave could crack bedrock, he reasoned, then with sufficient amplitude and perfect form, it might fracture the lattice of reality itself, allowing Mir to reach beyond mortality's tight circumference. Before such radical theories matured, the Dwemer economy thrived on more pragmatic marvels. Trade caravans laden with gyro-stabilized crates brought refined metals and lexicon cubes to distant ports. At Necrom in the east, silty barges exchanged eelgrass silk for cog-toothed water pumps that never clogged. In Whiterun's tundra, Nords tolerated their secretive neighbors in exchange for brass grain mills whose aerial sails drank even the faintest breeze. For every stronghold diverging into esoteric research, another perfected mundane innovation, ensuring Dwemeri coppers flowed through nearly every kingdom's purse. Their coinage, minted from an alloy of copper, tin, and minute Ethereum trace, rang with a higher frequency than standard septims, a distinctive chime that surface bankers learned to trust. Art among the deep Elves adhered to symmetry and recurrence. Composer engineers wrote symphonies designed to be played on hammer silos. Vast organ-like towers that struck tuned ingots with steam-driven pistons. Music served structural and ceremonial purposes alike. When a new tunnel network opened, architects cued encoded vibrations through the hammer silos to stabilize freshly exposed crystals along the route, preventing catastrophic collapse. The resulting reverberations doubled as communal celebration. Families gathering along balconies to experience bass tremors rolling through their bones like distant thunder. Dancers accompanied the vibrations with measured arm arcs, replicating pendulum paths that visually mapped the same frequencies. Beauty, in Dwemer eyes, was the audible proof of structural integrity. The spiritual vacuum that outsiders perceived was, to the deep Elves, a space filled by relentless inquiry. Debates often became contests of real-time prototyping. A speaker proposed a theorem, challengers assembled miniature gear housings on the forum floor to demonstrate predicted variables. Victors earned the privilege of inscribing their names, rendered as precise frequency sets, into the memory wall, a spiraling tower whose base wrapped the main archive. This wall stood as testament that progress, not lineage, conferred immortality. Yet even in such meritocracy, fractures emerged. Some architects concealed findings to secure advantage for their own clan. Others argued that open dissemination hastened mediocrity by rewarding only marginal improvements. The tension between secrecy and collective elevation smoldered beneath every symposium. Outside their halls, storms of politics brewed. Chimer tribes, following Prophet Veloth from Somerset exile, had long settled neighboring coasts. Unlike the Dwemer, the Chimer revered their good Daedra, Boethia, Azura, Mephala, and nurtured fierce individualism under warrior poet heroes. Trade flickered between the two cultures, yet philosophical dissonance prevented lasting trust. To a chimer, devotion births strength. To a Dwemer, devotion fetters reason. Skirmishes ignited over contested mineral veins, cooled by pragmatic treaties, then flared anew in cycles as predictable as lunar phases. At times, scholars on either side posited that their people's disconnect traced back to the very moment of Veloth's schism. Two diverging answers to the riddle of existence. Transcend through faith, or mastery through knowledge. Through all these centuries, the deep elves kept attuned to the hush of the deep earth. Where magma surged too near, they installed expansion joints forged from tempered quarried ebony, designed to flex like living muscle. Where aquifers threatened collapse, they redirected flows into tiered cisterns that fed both turbines and fungal orchards. Such control over environment bred confidence approaching hubris. When lesser races marveled, Dwemer scribes corrected the record. These feats were not miracles, merely specific applications of universal constants. And in this assertion, one can detect the faint rumble of danger, an empire of minds so certain of its own infallibility that it failed to measure the weight of its own arrogance. Meanwhile in Hammerfell, Volenfell's towers pierced red, skies with lattice spires. Clan Rorken, ever wary of intrusion, perfected siege engines capable of launching molten glass across horizons, their gyro gimbals adjusted to compensate for Nirn's curvature. Local Yokudan tribes would one day claim these lights were fallen stars, but for now, the desert nights shimmered under silent parabolas of luminous slag. Here too, engineers perfected modular domes that could be collapsed, transported, and reassembled around new ore veins, granting mobility unknown in mountain citadels. Isolation made them fierce, yet it also shielded them when tensions elsewhere began to coil toward war. Maritime exploration saw paddle wheel vessels rimmed with bronze teeth churning along iliac bays. These craft left little wake and no billow of sail, only the quiet churn of perfectly calibrated gears. Legends grown among Bretons later spoke of ghost ships whose lanterns shone from beneath the waves, shepherding schools of glowing jellyfish under moonlight. Scholars piecing sagas together suspect Dwemer aquanauts studied marine tonal resonance in hidden labs, mapping pressure nodes under coastal shelves. Among recovered tablets from the wreck of Dwarf Rupit, there exists an unfinished diagram, suggesting an entire floating city anchored by counter-rotating ring turbines meant to harness Maormer storms. The plan ends mid-script, no reason given. Architecture, whether in desert, mountain or seabed, adhered to the great proportion, a ratio derived from the interplay of 8 fundamental tonal intervals that, according to Dwemer theorem, mirrored the octaves of Albis. Walls built upon this ratio reportedly resisted stress far beyond conventional stone, as vibrations traveling through them cancelled destructive harmonics. Even unschooled treasure hunters centuries later discover that striking a Dwemer column produces a deep, reassuring chord like the pluck of a colossal lute string. It is a sound that has outlived its makers and continues to resonate through ruins, reminding intruders that the design still holds together long after torchlight and mortal breath fade. Yet beneath the triumphs, scholars now detect subtle premonitions. Records show an increase in restricted archives sealed behind logic gates requiring tri-harmonic keys, implying research moving from communal to clandestine. Council automatons began to experience conflicted edicts, not merely from distance, lag but from deliberate counter-inscriptions. Young apprentices lamented long waiting lists for master mentorship, as elder architects focused on private projects. In the lexicon logs, the frequency of the phrase "under mountain black light study" rises sharply, an oblique reference many believe points toward research at Red Mountain's heart. The deep elves, once united by rational purpose, gradually succumbed to internal competition for discovery's ultimate horizon. Through corridors still warm from their vanished hands, one may trace detritus of everyday life. Copper cooking pots, balanced on centurion toes for storage efficiency. Children's harmonic puzzles carved from soapstone, tiny steel slivers etched with model resonance equations given as New Year gifts. These ghosts speak softly of a people not wholly alien, but grounded in routine chores and quiet amusements. They loved clear lines, reliable schedules, stories of improbable engineering feats recited over communal cisterns. If one closes one's eyes amid the ruins of Bethung Thumps at dusk, the wind rushing through collapsed gear shafts resembles the gentle chatter of Dwemer merchants bartering for piston grease or new calibration forks. In such moments, the divide between now and then thins, and Nirn itself seems poised to speak a single perfect chord that would unmake the illusion of time. Here, at the threshold where foundational centuries give way to coming cataclysm, Chapter 1 must relinquish its hold. The deep elves stand atop an edifice of logic unparalleled, forging wonders twin to their skepticism. They are confident, self-contained, and ready, though they do not yet know it, to test their grandest hypothesis against the beating heart of creation. In the simmering chambers beneath Red Mountain, Kagrenak sharpens tuning forks, of silvered ebony, each calibrated to frequencies untried by mortal hand. The air vibrates with possibility, and faint tremors ripple through granite as though the world itself were adjusting to accommodate the scale of their ambition. The story of the Dwemer continues, unbroken, into the deepening glow of forge fires that will soon challenge the very boundaries of Mundus. A low, methodical pulse echoed through the magma vent chambers beneath Red Mountain, every interval precisely timed by rows of oscillating pistons that rose and fell in tireless communion with the planet's inner fires. When those pistons paused, never for more than a breath, it was only to register the minute adjustments of seismic drift, corrections instantly fed into brass cogitators, humming along adjoining conduits. In the faint crimson glow, junior attendants in hammered bronze aprons waited with styluses poised above slate tablets, ready to note deviations down to the 1000th resonance beat. Above them, on stepped platforms of polished obsidian, senior tonal architects observed the readouts without comment. Their gold filigreed pauldrons caught the forge light, reflecting patterns that danced across the cavern walls like slow-moving constellations. Near the highest platform stood Kagrenak himself, one hand resting upon the silver ebony tuning fork that had already become an extension of his thoughts. He spoke only when necessary, and then in a voice pitched so evenly, it seemed less a command than an algorithm seeking verbal form. Each word, each syllable, aligned with the harmonic tables etched into the metal rim of the control dais, anchoring practical labor to pure theorem. At the same moment in distant Alft-and, dawn cycles were commencing under an artificial firmament of pale azure crystal. Faint lavender lights seeped through hexagonal skylights set into the ceiling of the great residential dome, triggering a gentle chorus of sub-harmonic chimes that suffused the corridors like mist. Families stirred from sleep inside modular alcoves whose partitions opened on silent hinges to reveal communal walkways, each lined with rows of lumen fungus contained behind etched glass. It was not customary to greet the new cycle with spoken benedictions. Instead, the deep elves stepped out in orderly progression, acknowledging one another with slight inclinations of the head, while the day's first filtration hum vibrated underfoot. Personal conversation would come later, when minds were fully aligned with the pace dictated by the city's resonant lattice. An observer might have seen only seamless routine, but beneath that facade lay an intricate social structure refined, over centuries and held together by a lattice of rights and obligations, almost invisible to those born inside it. Where other races relied on bloodline nobility or divine mandate, the Dwemer calibrated hierarchy by contribution to collective equilibrium. At birth, Every child received a provisional notation within the city's memory wall. No name, only a harmonic placeholder indexed to a predictive algorithm that tracked resource flow and projected future need. During early childhood, a team of tonal pediatricians, called Shirnam, vibrational shepherds in the old syntax, measured physical growth and cognitive markers against that algorithm. They recorded each datum as a microtone variation within the child's placeholder entry. By 30 years of age, when elven physiology entered stable maturity, the individual's harmonic signature had been refined fine enough to fit exactly within one or another branch of civic function. Those branches organized society into 5 primary strata. At the base stood the stewards of continuance, responsible for water management, air filtration, fungal cultivation, and the countless small interventions that kept subterranean life viable. Above them operated the mednat, or artisans of application, smiths, glassblowers, textile chemists, and technician crews who serviced steam conduits in shifts so regular that timepieces elsewhere in Nirn could have calibrated themselves to Dwemery labour bells. Above these, the lexicon custodians directed the archives, interpreted older schematics, and maintained the vast lexicon coils, long ribbons of inscribed alloy kept under perfectly dry conditions in vaults surrounded by inert noble gas. Their guardianship extended to memory crystals and the partial soul imprints contained within them, though usage of such imprints had been steadily declining as mnemonic calculus improved. Fourth came the cuirass of force, engineers proficient in animunculi design, siege engines, and militarized hydraulic systems. Contrary to surface rumor, this stratum was not a standing army. Rather, its adherents viewed conflict as a secondary outcome of structural fault. Their principal duty was to ensure any Dwemer stronghold could withstand geological catastrophe or external aggression long enough for stewards and custodians to evacuate critical lattices. Nevertheless, they trained unceasingly in the martial applications of resonance, compressive wave pulses that could shatter granite or, if finely tuned, render organic flesh insensate without permanent harm. At the apex stood the tonal architects, a cadre so limited in number that entire cities often boasted fewer than 24. Induction required mastery of oscillation calculus, demonstrated synesthesia across at least 3 sensory axes, and an unblemished record of lattice predictions over 5 decades. Nominees submitted themselves for evaluation inside the reverberation. Well, a spherical chamber lined with concentric rings of hammered hooded steel. Within the well, they deciphered an unscripted tonal sequence broadcast through the rings, each note composed from a random interference pattern generated by the council automaton at that exact moment. The candidate had but 3 breaths to replicate, the sequence on a quartz string lyre. Success meant entrance into the architect's fraternity. Failure meant reassignment to any civic branch that could make use of such finely honed auditory perception. Few passed, and those who did thereafter surrendered birth names, adopting designation strings based on the frequencies they had matched in the well. Tonal architects shouldered the gravest obligations. As interpreters of the Earth's own voice, they orchestrated both mundane operations and metaphysical ventures. A single mistuned edict could collapse internal galleries or scramble the logic cores of centurions citywide. For that reason, tradition mandated that no architect ever worked in isolation. Even Kagrenak maintained a small circle of peers, their identities concealed behind bronze-masked helmets during proceedings inside Enchardak's Cathedra Hall. There they debated theories too delicate even for the council automatons. Bound by oaths older than any living mer, they refrained from recording such deliberations until consensus reached a 99.9% probability threshold. Only then did they inscribe new hash keys into the collective matrix. Animunculi pervaded every echelon. In residential corridors, spider drones barely larger than a mare's hand scuttled between wall inlets, extracting lint and fine particulates through capillary brushes of horsehair and golden wire. Their internal heating cores allowed them to sterilize entire surfaces as they moved, leaving behind faint ozone and a whispering chirp like distant harps. Children played mathematical games trying to predict their cleaning routes, a sanctioned pastime used by educators to train pattern recognition. Slightly larger drones, called thrumin riders, delivered nutrient loaves and flavor-neutral broth to communal mess cycles. Every such construct could be tracked from the central harmonic grid. Should a fault occur, its resonance ID flashed red on the monitoring panoply, prompting a steward to dispatch a correction team. Sphere sentinels comprised the second common class. When dormant, they curled into reinforced spheres that rolled along guide grooves carved into every major passageway. Upon detecting unauthorized kinetic signatures, footsteps where no Dwemer schedule allotted, they unfurled with a hiss of compressed vapor, extending segmented limbs tipped with socketed manipulator claws. Surface myths insisted these claws were weapons, but in reality, they housed diagnostic prongs capable of micro-temperature readings and metallurgical scans. Only in high-alert situations did the Sentinel shift to defensive pattern, channeling superheated steam through its armatures to create bludgeoning force capable of rupturing chitin or steel. Sentinels enforced not laws, but tempo. They ensured every resonance field remained free from chaotic interference, a role as much orchestral conductor as guardian. Above them loomed the Centurions. 15 cubits tall, their bronze frames moved. With balletic precision, each step cushioned by hydraulic pistons designed to produce no more than a dull thump, loud enough to warn but never to startle. Centurions stationed in forge halls monitored furnace pressure differential, manually adjusting ore chute angles in the event of automated misalignment. Others patrolled mining caverns prone to gas seepage, their onboard sensors tuned to volatile compounds. If methane concentration rose beyond safe resonance frequency, a Centurion would signal evacuation through a subaudible bass pulse that traveled faster through stone than any spoken alarm. By the time stewards reached the threshold, the Centurion would already be mixing inert gas from internal canisters to saturate the chamber, extinguishing combustion risk before flame could even form. When the fortnight of calibration arrived, a bi-monthly cycle universal across Dwemery culture, the entire social lattice shifted into maintenance mode. All routine production ceased. Market exchange counters folded their shutters, water wheels slowed to idling turns, and the resonant grid flashed amber citywide. Household chores became collective ceremonies. Citizens gathered at communal stations to polish gear sprockets, resurface piston rods, and retune harmonic dampers. Children carried lantern slugs that emitted steady violet light, illuminating tiny fissures invisible in normal glow. The lexicon custodians opened deposition chutes for artisans to submit recent design iterations, each crate accompanied by manifest plates describing metallurgical composition and intended vibrational role. Tonal architects circulated among work, bays, striking random alloys with slender tuning picks of endril glass, listening for aberrant undertones that might indicate impurities. The hush of creation withheld, replaced by methodical whispers of inspection, was almost meditative. Many Dwemer described calibration fortnights as their version of religious Sabbath, except devotion was paid to precision, and silence itself became liturgy. For all their atheistic rigor, the deep elves were hardly bereft of ritual. One of the most revered occasions was the null zenith, observed exactly once every 224 days, when Massa and Secunda crossed nodes in such a manner that their reflected light cancelled a measurable fraction of surface lunar pull on Resdane's tectonic plate. During that interval, the mountains shuddered a trace less, magma pressure dipped, and Red Mountain's internal churn quieted to a smooth purr. From mathematical prediction alone, the Dwemer determined that such stillness represented the closest Mundus ever came to absolute vibrational neutrality. Citadels across the region dimmed all artificial luminance, Families gathered at atrium balconies looking down into mechanically stilled fountains whose placid surfaces mirrored darkened vault ceilings. One by one, they recited the 10 axioms of Ax al-Lan in monotone, not as prayer but as affirmation of the cosmos's reducibility to numeric law. At the zenith's exact nadir, a harmonic gong sounded, and for 3 full heartbeats, every voice fell silent. Witnesses claimed the hush was so complete, they could feel their own bones resonate with an inaudible chord etched deep into Nirn's crust. After the 3rd heartbeat, a soft ripple spread through the assembled throng, a single shared breath, and then life resumed without overt celebration, as though the most sacred moment possible was simply an absence registered, catalogued, and then set aside. Each civic branch maintained its own domiciles. Stewards lived nearest the agricultural terraces, their quarters practical but comfortable, walls inset with bioluminescent lichen, cultivated in precise geometric grids. Artisans inhabited mid-level, galleries, close to supply depots and communal bath chambers, where mineral-rich water circulated through rose-gold piping, shedding faint warmth that kept metal joints flexible. Custodians resided beside the archives, an area kept slightly cooler to preserve etched alloys. Their homes featured revolving book cradles and suspended reading pods equipped with adjustable acoustics. The cuirass of force occupied fortified sublevels, sections where corridor ceilings curved into ballistic arches, and every door was double sealed for rapid lockdown. Their barracks included harmonic gun ranges, long tubes of reinforced brass where frequency rifles fired coherent resonance bolts at targets of quartz composite. The rifles were not intended for warfare so much as calibratory proof. If a bolt could pierce a 20 cubits thick slab of stone without producing secondary fractures, its harmonic signature was validated. Tonal architects dwelt apart, often in chambers that wound paradoxically both inward and upward, following spirals calculated to minimize acoustic reflection. Visitors stepping inside described a curious sensation. One's thoughts seemed to slow, as though entering a zone where even subjective time obeyed measured cadence. Some architects allowed apprentices to share these quarters for brief spans, exposing them to fundamental harmonic stillness required for advanced perception. Such exposure, however, was strictly timed. Prolonged immersion risked neurological adaptation that produced oversensitivity to mundane sound, a condition known as nan-fear or shivering ear. Education underpinned every branch's continuity. At 8 years of age, children attended the first wave, 10 cycles of observation in which they simply watched adults at work, never asking questions aloud. They recorded curiosities on wax tablets. Instructors collected these tablets after each cycle, analyzing inquiries for conceptual depth. Only once a pattern of questions demonstrated layered abstraction did the child progress to second wave, wherein they engaged mentors directly. By adolescence, each student had compiled a portfolio of hypotheses, arguments about gear ratios, steam density, or memory crystal capacity, many of which were naive. Educators preserved every hypothesis, binding them into personal codices, presented on adulthood's threshold. Failure and misconception were not shunned but memorialized, standing reminders that growth demanded error. Law, too, favored prevention over punishment. The Dwemer legal code, engraved upon rotating hex columns at civic centers, contained a mere 43 statutes, yet each statute referenced cross-harmonic clauses listing specific oscillation thresholds correlated with civic stratification. To break a law meant producing a disruptive resonance pattern, diverting water pressure beyond safe bandwidth, firing a resonance weapon without calibratory clearance, or corrupting lexicon data. Offenders rarely faced incarceration. Instead, they underwent recalibration sessions inside echo chambers designed to flood the auditory cortex with carefully phased frequencies. The sessions realigned neural impulse timing, fostering renewed adherence to structural rhythm. Only in severe sabotage cases, attempts to override council automatons, or introduce false sequences into the harmonic grid, did the code mandate dissolution of civic rights, effectively casting the offender out. Exile, in Dwemery practice, was tantamount to slow execution, for survival outside the lattice demanded reliance on faith or chance. Concepts deemed statistically fatal. Commerce with surface realms remained strictly transactional. Caravans arrived at predetermined vents, never entering the strongholds. Goods transferred via vertical lifts powered by water pistons. For Chima traders, these lifts felt like hollow tree trunks of immaculate brass, spiraling with script that glowed faintly as the platform descended. Buyers never saw the Dwemer who operated them. Conversation took place through resonant tubes that modulated voices into neutral tones, erasing emotional inflection and personal identity. Payments involved sealed casks of raw salt rice, guar hides, and moon sugar crystals harvested from the southern isles. In return, the Dwemer provided rotary threshers or micro-lensed lantern arrays capable of projecting coherent light beams across battlefield distances. Such devices had no clear precedent among other races, and many Chima received them with uneasy awe. Some saw them as gifts, others as reminders that the deep elves' power lay far beyond pity or malice. Beyond Resdain, Clan Rorken's desert, strongholds exemplified variation on core principles. Volan Fell had no natural cavern roof. Instead, Rorken engineers erected an immense amber dome of fused glass segments, each interlocked by flex couplers that allowed minute expansion under the noon sun. The dome captured solar energy, channeled through prismatic veins into subterranean reservoirs where it heated steam turbines. At night, stored heat vented upward, radiating from the dome in shimmering columns that created the illusion of auroras over the desert. Local redguards, their ancestors still migrating from Yakuda, saw these lights and wove them into folktales about jinn locked in crystal palaces. The Rorken neither confirmed nor denied such stories. They simply maintained the orchard pumps, irrigating date palms and ash fig groves, whose fruit fermented into a mild alcohol used to clean brass bearings down to an almost molecular shine. Despite their geographical schism, Rorken and mainland citadels remained linked through the council automatons' subharmonic relays. Every 9th cycle, priority channels synchronized to exchange volumetric data on ore throughput, water quotas, and knowledge of new alloys. Yet where Vardenfels holds reported a minor but steady increase in restricted projects, Volanfell logs showed a plateau. Rorken mines had turned outward, envisioning mobile foundries crossing the dunes, sun-trapped furnaces mapping lines of power on the desert's surface rather than bored through stone. Scholars now suspect this outward gaze delayed their involvement in Kagrehnak's high theories, giving them perspective, yet also succumbing them later to catastrophic lag when political reality demanded unity. Tonal engineer Vamerin, pronounced Va-mer-in to ease TTS cadence, stood as Volanfell's principal architect during this era. Her journals survive in fragmentary script etched inside nested cylinders, each locked within the next like orrery spheres. One popular passage concerns the marriage of two resonance plates, written in language almost uncharacteristically tender. I witnessed today the meeting of frequencies long estranged. Plate A sang at 48.9 kHz, yet lacked anchor. Plate B droned at 49 even, yearning downward. When bound by a rivet of living brass, they harmonized into an interval so perfect I wept. A rare indulgence swiftly concealed. We speak of gods as myths, yet here was a brief glimpse of something greater, born of math alone. Some have seized upon Vamerin's words as evidence of nascent spirituality, but lexicon scholars argue she merely described emotional response to flawless optimization, a moment when entropy bowed before order. However interpreted, such accounts hint that measured atheism did not render the Dwemer lifeless automatons. They felt, They yearned, but they disciplined feelings into structured channels, the way a smith controls molten metal within a mold. Daily life, though regimented, offered avenues of aesthetic delight. Water gardens sculpted into helix forms allowed citizens to stroll amid misting spirals of mineral-rich vapor. The droplets clung to brass railings, forming micro-lenses that refracted luminescent fungi into rainbow shards flickering across travelers' faces. Musicians stationed at nexus bridges played crystalline tubes set within water streams. Each note combined flute timbre with gentle splash, creating chords at once liquid and metallic. Children studied wave interference patterns in the pools, tracing ripples that collided into fractal lattices, teaching early lessons in harmonic superposition. Family structure balanced collectivism with personal choice. Bonding between adults required submission of synchronization charts to civic registrars. Charts measured respiratory rhythm, pulse variability, and conversational cadence over 8 contiguous cycles. If predictive models suggested the pair's combined harmonic output would destabilize local grids, the registrar politely declined certification. Some applicants contested results, arguing emotional compatibility outweighed vibrational mismatch. Counselors then offered a compromise: retreat to isolation chambers for recalibration therapy, aligning their internal rhythms until deviation fell within acceptable parameters. Successful bonds often lasted centuries, though the concept of romantic exclusivity held less importance than mutual advancement of craft. Partners frequently worked in distinct strata, exchanging data nightly via personal resonance diaries placed on shared bedside plinths. Children born of such unions inherited not only genetic potential, but also composite harmonic placeholders, derived by geometrically averaging both parents' notational matrices. Funerary rites remained stark. Upon death, a citizen's remains entered the dissolution crucible, a chamber where intense heat and vacuum reduced organic matter to ash in silent minutes. A steward collected a modest vial of the powder. The rest went to basalt digesters powering tertiary turbines. The vial, containing approximately 2% of initial mass, was then mixed into mortar used for maintenance of the memory wall. Thus, physical essence reintegrated into collective record, not as relic, but as literal binding agent. If the deceased held high standing, their last recorded resonance equation was etched at eye height. Otherwise, it appeared further up or down the spiral, location determined solely by harmonic significance, never by sentimental ranking. Onlookers rarely wept. Grief expressed itself in renewed labor, perpetuating balance so recently disturbed by a life's departure. For all internal order, cracks widened where Dwemer ambition met outer uncertainty. Reports reached the cuirass of force that Kaima border, skirmishes intensified near Foyada Kadasu. Sphere sentinels dispatched to monitor ashland passes returned, bearing scarring consistent with Daedric weaponry, blades etched in worshipful script to Boethia. Council automatons assigned to frontier holds began issuing partially contradictory edicts, some recommending reinforcement, others advocating calibrated retreat to avoid escalating hostilities. Lexicon custodians at Nchadak filed requests for updated war probability curves. Kag Rainak, preoccupied by deeper questions, delegated initial response to subordinates, but not before he noted, almost offhandedly, that conflict might offer unprecedented data on tonal force application in open terrain. His remark did not go unnoticed. Among tonal architects, debate erupted. Was it ethical, even within Dwemer frameworks, to field yet untested waveform disruptors against living Mer? Some insisted any tool derived from pure theorem carried neither malice nor mercy, only function. Others argued that function, applied without restraint, risked destabilizing the lattice far beyond its capacity to self-correct. The disagreement mirrored earlier fractures between secrecy and openness. Increasingly, architects formed private consortia, sharing research only within cloistered circles bound by oaths enforced via resonant seals keyed to their own neural patterns. To break an oath meant subjecting oneself to lethal dissonance, should sealed knowledge slip past tongue or stylus. Animunculi technology advanced apace. Engineers in Enbathar-Zel unveiled the whisper loom, a quadrupedal construct whose hollow thorax resonated at frequencies too high for mere hearing, yet capable of mapping subterranean caverns miles away by analyzing echo returns. Data collected by the loom fed directly into live cartographic matrices, allowing architects to predict magma shifts before they threatened city integrity. Some of those maps later guided tunneling expeditions toward Red Mountain's deep cauldrons, where Kag Raynak set up provisional labs shielded by adamant latticework. At the same time, lexicon archivists in Manzulft perfected the crystalline, chorus, an array of thousand-facet gems suspended in near vacuum, each facet tuned to a specific Dwemeric root syllable. When struck by calibrated energy waves, the chorus could recite entire passages from the memory wall with no moving parts, essentially a vocalization device for the archives. Scholars listening outside described voices that sounded both male and female, young and old, overlaying one another in perfect synchronization. Though intended as a retrieval mechanism, rumors spread that the chorus possessed a kind of emergent insight, capable of recombining stored data into novel hypotheses. The claim troubled many architects, for it hinted at consciousness arising from collective pattern rather than singular design, a notion dangerously close to metaphysical speculation. Religion never re-entered the picture, but philosophical treatises multiplied. One, titled On the Illusion of Intent, argued that perception of will was merely compression of randomness into pattern by limited observers. Another, Tessellations of Absence, compiled examples where elimination of structure yielded more efficient outcomes than additive construction. Its final chapter proposed that if Mundus itself were a flawed lattice, removal of key constraints could elevate all Mer to a higher state. Critics lodged formal challenges, citing insufficient proof. Yet nonetheless, committees convened to test micro-scale lattice reductions inside sealed chambers. In the aftermath of one such experiment, an entire wing of the Foldumar conclave reportedly vanished, machinery, walls, and personnel, leaving behind a spherical void whose interior surface bore a mirror finish so perfect that reflections appeared with unsettling delay. The incident was sealed from public record, but whispers of negation field catastrophe filtered through artisan gossip, carried on calibration shifts across the provinces. Outside observers, Chimer scouts, Nordic traders, imperial precursor, chroniclers, failed to comprehend these developments in full. They saw only glimpses. A new breed of centurion, with segmented wings gliding silently across canyons. Caravans halting at subterranean gates guarded by constructs whose chest plates glowed with captive starlight. Dwemer scholars purchasing crates of bone meal and gnarled heartwood for experiments no outsider would ever witness. Lawmasters back in Ebenhart or Winterhold recorded sightings in dusty tomes, spraying pages with speculation about machine spirits or forgotten Daedra bound in metallic shells. Such theories comforted them, assigning familiar myth to alien phenomena. Meanwhile, beneath layers of stone and theorem, the deep elves pursued clarity undeterred. Amid all this, everyday life persisted. Artisan couples debated the efficiency of vent flare glass over morning grain. Children sat cross-legged, learning to factorize tritones into base vectors. A musician recorded the hum of molten ore sluices, later transposing the sound into a lullaby for newborns. The stewards installed a new water wheel design that doubled flow without increasing stress, prompting quiet satisfaction across the agriculture terraces. Families gathered by the observation galleries to watch aurora reflections ripple across hydraulic ceilings, the display as captivating to a Dwemer child as any sunset to a human one. Yet the lattice trembled with premonition. in Subterranean. Auditoria, Cagrenac and his peers drafted schema to interface with that which lay beneath Red Mountain. What rumour would later call the Heart of Lorcan. The project, known only by cipher Chaothra in council memories, demanded resource requisitions that strained even Dwemer logistics. Entire veins of Ethereum were diverted from civic use, rerouted through clandestine channels to forges that burned in secret within char-black halls. Animunculi stationed at those forges bore blank resonant signatures, an impossibility under normal grid operations, rendering them invisible to central monitors. Only architects with master-level clearance could track their movement, and, even then, only by listening for anomalies in ambient stone hum. In the outskirts of Cagrenac's operation, an apprentice architect named Thuldrin, recorded a private reflection on his lexicon slate. As I calibrate the vent arrays, I feel the mountain pulse like a heart, but whose heart beats so deep? If the world itself is mechanism, who forged its first gear? Are we not, then, rightful to unseal its casing and discern the maker's craft, or equally, its absence? To drive NEP forward, resources had to flow without bureaucratic drag. Council automatons endured a firmware upgrade. Lexicon shards encoded with Cagrenac's latest algorithms were inserted into their logic bays, recalibrating priority thresholds. Henceforth, requisitions tagged with NEP keys skipped normal validation layers, drawing on Ethereum caches previously sequestered for civic renovation. Only a handful of senators argued, but the automatons recorded their protests as tonal deviations, incompatible with forecast survival indices. The dissenters found themselves reassigned to peripheral research centers far from the mountain. Such banishment was not punitive per Dwemer law, merely corrective alignment, but it effectively muted organized opposition. Parallel to resource reallocation, tonal laboratories in Mesulft experimented with inertial lacunae, pockets of space where localized physics could be detuned from surrounding reality. Researchers arranged 11 prism columns around a fulcrum of liquefied Ethereum, each column singing a separate harmonic overtone. Within the test chamber, a marble sphere dangled by silver thread. As the prisms activated, observers noted that the sphere's pendulum swing slowed without friction loss explanation, as though time itself had thickened about the orb. Further modulation caused the marble to hover in mid-air, its tether slack. The phenomenon lasted precisely 12 seconds before the chamber's outer walls registered microfractures. The experiment halted, but its implications thrilled Cagrenac's circle. If inertial lacunae could be scaled, the resulting elimination of gravitational drag might permit megastructures otherwise impossible. Data surged across subharmonic relays linking Resdane to Volenfell and beyond. From the desert came Rorcan treatises on broad sun excitation, a process using solar resonance to prime aetherite alloys before subterranean forging, thereby preloading them with radiant energy for later release. Rorcan engineers forwarded prototypes, but initial tests produced explosive harmonics incompatible with mountain magma fields. Volenfell's dispatches soon slowed. Its clan became preoccupied with countering Yokudan pirates raiding outer caravans. Yet even their intermittent insights guided refinements in Cagrenac's furnace arrays. Outside the Dwemer sphere, Chimer spiritual sensitives began reporting nightmares. Brass giants stepping across red landscapes, their footfalls leaving perfect geometric imprints glowing white-hot. Viv Isi, then still merely one of many poet generals, penned a fragment describing heart tones beating like war drums in the belly of ghost gods. His verses circulated among temple scribes, fueling alarm that the Athras-resisting deep elves sought to build a new world without ancestral spirits. Nerevar, chieftain and statesman, attempted a diplomatic mission, traveling with a retinue to Nab Enzen. Records converge on an audience granted, but what passed between Nerevar and Cagrenac remains speculation. Some later Chimer sources suggest Nerevar witnessed early schematics of the tools and left in foreboding silence. Dwemer archives contain a single cryptic line dated to that day. Meeting concluded. External variables remain within predicted tolerance. As work progressed, Dwemer society bent increasingly towards singular purpose. Calibration fortnights condensed to 9-day intervals. Public festivals, such as the Null Zenith Reflection, became private meditations limited to essential personnel. Artisan markets, once teeming with incremental innovation, now displayed mass-produced components standardized for NEP assembly lines. Families whose harmonic signatures matched key maintenance. Tasks relocated en masse to mountain villages carved into fresh tunnels. Portable domiciles known as reliopods replaced fixed quarters, each pod featuring modifiable resonance dampers, so inhabitants could adjust their auras to the demands of rotating shifts. The forging of keening for TTS clarity, commenced, in a chamber flooded by high-frequency vibrations generating continuous nodes of standing resonance. Master metallurgist Dronan shaped the blade edge beneath lenses of ether glass that refracted both heat and sound, focusing energy into a line no thicker than a spider silk. With every pass of the shaping rod, the blade sang a brief, clear note. Each note's pitch deviated upward by exactly 1 cent, a micro-progression replicating the theoretical ascent from liminal space to Ethereus. Once the increment reached the 96th cent, Dronan quenched the blade in pulverized frost salts, crystallizing its lattice into near-absolute stability. Observers claimed the blade neither flashed nor smoked. It simply ceased being molten and became perfect edge. Kag-Ray-Nak himself etched the resonance matrix along its fuller, using a diamond stylus dipped in null oil, an alchemical solution that absorbed stray magicka. The matrix equated to a 1,000-line proof demonstrating equivalence between mortal descent and divine subtraction. Sunda, or Sundur, demanded bulk rather than finesse. Forged of tri-alloy Ethereum, ebony, and echo steel mined from deep-sea vents, its head weighed more than most Dwemer adults. To wield such mass without collapsing harmonic control, engineers embedded contra-rotating inertia rings inside, the haft, each tuned to counteract lateral swing forces. When the hammer moved, centrifugal gyros realigned the blow along mathematically ideal vectors. Dwemer test wielders reported minimal effort, as though the hammer desired to arrive at its destination and simply requested my arm to come along. The face of Sunda bore a stepped design, 3 terraces descending from blunt crown to beveled edge, symbolic of the 3 states of the heart: untouched, awakened, and mastered. Wraithguard proved most complex. Rather than fabricate a weapon, Kag-Ray-Nak opted for a protective gauntlet that could regulate the user's resonance field. Without such regulation, keening or sunder applied to the heart would rebound fatal energy, constructed from flexible brass chain overlaying interwoven Ethereum mesh. Wraithguard interfaced directly with wearer lymph nodes via microcapillary burrs. When donned, the gauntlet mapped the host's biorhythm and overlaid a secondary, harmonic signature strong enough to absorb heart-borne echo waves. Volunteers rotated wearing prototypes during controlled spire tests, each session lasting mere seconds, yet registering energy spikes exceeding thunderclap volumes. Several testers suffered neural haze afterward, an affliction comparable to Dedric's soul shock, but none perished. Kag-Ray-Nak deemed the side effects tolerable under war conditions. Further refinement would, he predicted, bring neural compatibility within standard tolerance ranges. Beyond immediate forge halls, Dwemer philosophers argued whether NEP goals aligned with original tenets of deep elven rationalism. One faction, the metric keepers, insisted that transforming cosmic principles into mechanical advantage expressed the very purpose of sentience: to examine, redefine, and improve reality. Another faction, the continuance custodians, warned of overreach, They cited earlier lattice reduction catastrophes as evidence that Mundus tolerated limited edits, but punished systemic rewrites. Among custodians, archivist Brailjar published an essay titled Margins of Stability, speculating that Nirn might possess fail-safe harmonics keyed to self-preservation. If those harmonics were disrupted, corrective backlash could unmake local existence. His words gained brief traction, but council automatons flagged the essay as low priority due to insufficient predictive accuracy. Brailjar later disappeared during an unscheduled trip to Cag Renac's vent arrays. Official logs marked the absence, voluntary relocation, yet no follow-up entry recorded new coordinates. Amid intellectual turbulence, mundane routines persisted. Agricultural terraces introduced heat-time varietals, thriving on residual forge warmth. Children still assembled vibrational puzzles, though now many pieces displayed NEP runes, subtly baking propaganda into early education. Sphere sentinels updated patrol routes, focusing on choke points leading to newly sealed underfissures. Dwellers grew accustomed to hearing faint sub-bass pulses at odd hours, a sign of large-scale resonance tests down lair corridors. These pulses caused no harm, yet pets, small beetle hounds bred to sniff steam leaks, became restless, scratching at bronze floors, until caretakers led them into echo-free alcoves. External tensions reached new height when Hymer scouts intercepted a Dwemer transport lugging crystalline sarcophagi along the Odai Plateau. Inside, each sarcophagus floated translucent humanoid shapes, held in stasis by amber light. Chimer, priests feared soul traps. Dwemer records later identified them as harmonic dummies, biosimulants grown to replicate mer tissue and resonance. They served as testbeds for blowback forecasts when heart energy interfaced with living flesh. The interception ended bloodlessly, but rumors erupted across Chimer settlements. The Dwemer were stealing souls, building golems, engineering an army of husks. Nerevar convened a war council at Moonmoth Fort, urging caution, yet preparing for armed resistance should proof of blasphemy emerge. Cag Renac responded by accelerating timelines. Under his directive, the NEP lattice, christened the Tonal Transference Matrix, began final assembly inside the mountain's caldera. The matrix comprised concentric rings of aetherite conductor rods, rising like wrought fins from molten rock. Each ring pivoted on magnetized axes linked to gyroscopic hearts. When rotation sequences initiated, entire rings emitted sheets of blue-white aurorae that danced beneath the molten ceiling. Technicians wearing reflective masks scurried along catwalks, adjusting couplings with torque keys shaped like 8-point stars. Every bolt twist had to match displacement tables. Deviation risked desynchronizing adjacent rings, generating harmonic feedback loops that could liquefy metal. Overseeing it all, Cag Renac stood on a floating calibration disc, an anti-grav platform sustained by inertial lacuna arrays tested months prior. From that vantage, he heard not the deafening roar others perceived, but a symphony of mathematics, prime intervals modulating into odd harmonics, weaving the caldera into a cathedral of rational sound. Final calibration required a live heart surrogate. Unable to access the actual artifact yet, engineers grew resonant supercrystals inside vacuoles lined with powdered dragon bone. The crystals, head-sized and spun to near weightlessness by internal vectors, emitted countertones approximating the heart's etheric bleed. Keening's edge slashed across the surrogate, cleaving a symmetric wedge while releasing a pale surge of energy. Sunda followed, delivering a downward percussion. Instruments tracked dispersion. Wraithguard's wearer absorbed residual echo. Readouts affirmed tolerances. 95% efficiency. Fatalities. 0. Structure integrity. High. The test team debriefed in efficient monotone. No cheer, no elation. Then filed results into lexicon racks under the codename Proof of Concept. By this stage, entire Dwemer cities operated on skeleton civic services. Non-critical. Artisans accepted long-duration stasis contracts, reclining in hibernation pods set around geothermal hearts, trusting that upon awakening, they would inherit an optimized world. Families recorded farewell sequences onto memory crystals, leaving them with lexicon custodians for redundancy. The social lattice, once broad and multi-layered, now resembled a spear, a single point of intense purpose supported by a narrowing spine of logistics. Any failure would propagate instantly, but confidence held. Numbers predicted success within acceptable error margins. Still, caution compelled Cagrenac to engage contingency measures. He commissioned phase ward capsules, coffin-sized, cylinders lined with void glass. In the improbable event of catastrophic lattice collapse, capsules would generate inertial lacunae isolating occupants from the local space-time cascade. Placement prioritized key architects and their immediate data caches. Volunteers among the cuirass of force pre-selected coordinates for rapid insertion should alarms trigger. Drills rehearsed silent evacuation through vent shafts whose walls possessed acoustic cloaking, masking escape vibrations from enemy sensors. Outside Red Mountain, diplomatic ties frayed beyond salvage. The chimeric temple hierarchy accused the Dwemer of trespassing against Azura's design. Boethian cultists openly declared holy war, arming followers with ebony scythes etched with runic hexes. Even so, Nerevar sought final parley, travelling under white banners onto ash-grey slopes. Dwemer watchers observed via whisper-loom drones perched on basalt outcrops. Cagrenac declined meeting, sending instead a resonant transmission. Timeline critical. Interface imminent. Recommend non-interference. Chima scribes transcribed this as arrogance. Azura interpreted it as hubris. Prophecy seeds began to sprout among Ashlander wise women, foretelling a sixth house rising from unwitnessed ash. Within days of the refused parley, Chima militias probed Dwemer fortifications along Foyada Mamaya. Skirmishes broke out, steam-powered, scorpions against Daedric-anointed warhounds. Hammerbursts of resonance scattered ash dunes into glass spires. Chima shadow mages countered with void spears that darkened air. Casualties remained minor, yet every clash dragged both people closer to total war. Reports filtered to Cagrenac's forged dais. He annotated them with terse notes. External variable drift, plus 2%. Acceptable. Amid rising strife, tonal architects pushed the matrix into final readiness. They integrated a master frequency key called the Mutra chord, derived from overlapping signals recorded during inertial lacuna tests. The chord split into 3 subharmonics, each mapped to Keening, Sunder, and Wraithguard. When played, in unison, the subharmonics synchronized the wearer's biofield with the heart, opening a channel for controlled energy transfer. Yet simulations uncovered unpredictable ghost signals, resonance echoes from unknown source tiers. Cagrenac theorized they stemmed from the heart's own self-regulation algorithms, an artifact of Lorcan's original sundering. To accommodate, he inserted dynamic dampers along the matrix's outer ring, each damper controlled by a predictive algorithm that adjusted millisecond by millisecond, always chasing echo but never fixing it fully. In effect, the matrix became partially self-aware, balancing its own oscillations without constant operator input. Such automation unsettled some. Aid architect El La wrote a private missive. "We have authored a song that sings itself. What if it chooses a refrain we cannot survive?" She encrypted the note inside a lattice of minor countertones, but Cagrenac likely intercepted and filed it under psychological noise, category B. Work continued. Beyond the mountain, meteorologists noted unusual auroral ribbons, unseasonably low across Vardenfell. Scholars in Winterhold wrote of distant thunder with no storm. In the Imperial heartland, still fractious, centuries away from unification, isolated mages recorded interference in scrying pools, brass-hued, ripples that scrambled divination. No single authority connected the anomalies to dwelling forges in far Resdain, but the world began to feel vibrations of something vast turning under its foundations. Inside Red Mountain's caldera, on the eve of interface, Cag Raynak assembled, his prime cadre. They stood upon metallic platforms suspended by invisible fields above a churning sea of lava. Keening rested upon an upright stand of living brass, blade edge pointed skyward. Sunder hung in gravitic suspension, its hammerhead slowly rotating, reflecting furnace light in triumphal arcs. Wraithguard lay upon a cushion of chilled ebon felt, its finger joints half flexed, eager for the next heartbeat. Around them, the tonal transference matrix spun. Conductor rings sparkled with blue fire, casting shadows no natural flame could produce. The architects extended tuning wands and synced breath with Mutrar chord. A final nod from Cag Raynak triggered an ignition sequence. Resonators flared. A single note rose, so deep it seemed an emptiness rather than a sound, then climbed, through impossible octaves. In outer tunnels, dormant centurions stirred, aligning torque spindles as though listening. In distant Dwemer cities, council automatons paused, their glyphs flickering amber. At that precise cadence, across ash fields beyond, Chimer command flares arced into the sky, signaling the advance of united houses under Nerevar's banner. Thousands of armored Emir pressed forward, shields painted with Daedric sigils. Wizards intoned hymns to Azura, half-cloaked Ashlanders muttered desert litanies. War horns brayed like sorrowful cliff beasts. The ground trembled beneath their feet, not from their march, but from the mountain's song. Within the chamber, Cag Raynak raised keening. The blades fuller, filled with white fire without consuming fuel. He gestured to Chief Engineer, Archnaris, who activated the inertial lacuna core underlying the central dais. Time within the chamber slowed by measurable fractions. Sparks froze mid-flight. Droplets of sweat hung on brows like glass pearls. In that dilation, every movement could be perfected. Cag Raynak directed assistants to angle the blade at a calibratory crystal representing the heart's outer shell. He struck. The crystal rang as if tapped by gods, a crack spiderwebbed across its molten surface. Immediately, Sunder descended in counterstrike, delivering controlled compression. The mountain bucked, but containment pylons compensated. Wraithguard absorbed secondary waves, feeding them into dampers. Readouts surged green. Proof of concept graduated to near-divine reality. Outside, the Chimer saw Red Mountain Crown, itself with spiral aurora, colors shifting like oil upon water, saffron, turquoise, a shade of violet seen only in prophetic dream. Some fell to knees, believing it a sign of Daedra wrath. Others pressed on, swords bared. The first spheres of Dwemer defense unfolded from hidden bunkers, their eyes glowing as bright as the mountains. War at last became certainty. Inside forge halls, Cag Raynak concluded Phase 1. He ordered Wraithguard removed for final. Synchronization with its intended wielder, himself, or perhaps a chosen proxy. Records diverge, yet even Cag Raynak paused, fingers resting on the gauntlet's brass knuckles, sensing a faint hesitation in the Mutrar chord. Ghost signals spiked, then settled. He logged the anomaly. Undamped echo persists. Evaluate after Phase 2. Phase 2 demanded physical access to the heart. For that, the deepest shaft, labeled Chaothra Prime, would open. Animunculi cleared routes, melting basalt with neutral charge beams to avoid stray resonance. The shaft, narrow as a tomb, descended past magma pockets into a vault where the heart's stasis field shimmered, suspended above a column of night-black stone. The field resembled liquid moonlight, trapped inside invisible glass. Within it, the heart pulsed with a rhythm older than Nirn. Tonal sensors confirmed power curves approximating infinite feedback potential. No natural material could stabilize direct contact. Thus, the need for keening, sunder, and wraithguard logistics dictated a commencement within 7 cycles, but external war forced earlier deployment. Cag Raynak reconvened his cadre, instructing them to finalize vent purges and resonance shields. Some questioned readiness. Instruments still displayed minor jitter in Ghost Channel. Cag Raynak replied with calculated calm. Probability of catastrophic divergence remains sub 15%. Acceptable risk. He sealed minutes, ending debate. Meanwhile, Khmer armies breached outer corridors of Arkang Tam's Bitan. Dwemer defenders enacted precision withdrawals, guiding intruders into kill zones where harmonic mines detonated silent pulses that liquefied ear canals. Yet casualties accrued on both sides. Animunculi disabled by Daedric null hexes lay smouldering. Chimer war mages collapsed from feedback lash. Higher up, Rorkan sky domes pulsed emergency flares, requesting aid the mountain could not spare. Civilian food distribution faltered. Hydroponic terraces ran unattended. Steam pressure rose dangerously in remote city nodes. The spear tips, narrowing left-rear logistics exposed. Under such duress, Cag Raynak issued a full Code Blue directive. Every remaining council automaton accepted NEP supremacy, converting governance into martial algorithm. The lattice no longer sought equilibrium, but singular resolution, heart activation. The directive propagated through stone, brass, and memory at quasi-instinctive speed. Even remote sentinel drones paused, received, recalibrated. A single harmony unified the Dwemer at final threshold. The final ascent to the Heart Vault began at shift dawn. Keening and Sunder traveled in magnetized cradles, flanked by Centurion Honor Guard. Wraithguard adorned Cag Raynak's forearm. Tonal architects sang low instructions, descending triads that kept stabilization conduits in phase. At the vault's threshold, the ancient stone door slid aside, revealing the ineffable glow. Sensors registered gravitational anomalies, temperature inversions, fluctuations in thaumic flux, far beyond expected. Cag Raynak stepped forward, boots scraping basalt older than recorded history. He signaled to close the lacuna seal behind the team, isolating them from world noise. In that vacuum of distraction, only the heart and the mathematics of possibility remained. Thus, on cusp of penetration, Chapter 3 leaves the story suspended amid converging destinies. The Dwemer within a breath of rewriting cosmic arithmetic, the chimer at gates ready to spill blood for faith, and the mountain trembling between them, uncertain yet indivisible. A faint radiance flowed across the vault's obsidian walls, refracted by veins of half-melted glass that had formed when the original eruption of Red Mountain scoured living rock into glittering slag. Cag Raynak's footfalls sounded like distant chimes, each step releasing a dull echo swallowed almost instantly by the immensity of the chamber. Behind him, 2 Centurion escorts unfolded out of compact transport forms, segment by segment, until their spines brushed the fractured ceiling. They extended sensor vanes and rotated them one increment, scanning in low-gain mode that avoided interference with the vault's fragile equilibrium. The escort commander, a brass-scaled colossus designated OR-L, reported a null reading. No. Hostile ingress. No disruptive resonance patterns. With mechanical certainty, it resumed silent vigil, gyros counterspinning to maintain absolute stillness. Cag Raynak paused at the terminus of the pathway, a cantilevered basalt spur that projected over a caldera of molten stone. Below, and somehow above as well, hung the heart. It did not float so much as remain stationary while the universe drifted around it. Irregular, the size of a large mare's torso, it pulsed with crimson luminescence tempered by swirling amethyst threads. Each pulse arrived in perfect alignment with unseen tides, as immutable as lunar rise. Cag-Ray-Nak detected micro-fluctuations on the boundary between pulses, tiny stutters, fragments of cosmic percussion, where the wider lattice of reality seemed to falter and then correct. He whispered a notation, Delta 9/81. The value spiraled through his cochlear implant, an internal tuning fork grafted in youth, before locking into memory coils for later analysis. He raised Wraithguard to chest level. The gauntlet's plates slid with precise clicks, adjusting to match his physiological rhythm. A gentle counterpulse traveled through the armature, confirming synchronization. He signaled Archnaris and the remaining tonal architects to adopt standby positions around the chamber, forming an equilateral pentagon. Each architect carried a slim cylinder sheathed in woven Ethereum thread, tonal amplifiers that, when activated, would resonate with Keening's frequency envelope and stabilize wavefronts within the vault. Archnaris brandished Sunda in 2 hands. Gyroscopic stabilizers inside the haft emitted a soft hum, countering the hammer's mass so that even a slight wrist shift could redirect its trajectory. Keening rested in Cag-Ray-Nak's left hand, blade broadside across palm. Light gathered along its edge but produced no glare. Instead, it felt as if the metal absorbed extraneous photons, refining luminous impurities into coherent glow. Cag-Ray-Nak inhaled once, not to steel himself but to align oxygen intake with the cadence of the heart. Then, with a nod, he began the sequence. First, a single low-frequency tone, generated by the amplifiers, spread across the chamber. It slid along obsidian walls in waves that offset one another, cancelling echo. Silence collapsed into deeper silence, compressing all stray sound into a pocket smaller than thought. Cag-Ray-Nak stepped forward. Keening extended, point aimed, toward the heart's equatorial notch. At precisely 4 beats past the primary pulse, he thrust. The blade's tip met invisible resistance, parted it with a crystalline sigh, and pierced a shell of condensed ethereus only Keening could penetrate. The heart flared, not in anger, but in reaction, spirals of energy curling like sun flares around Keening's fuller. Wraithguard absorbed stray discharge, feeding it into dampeners that glowed across the gauntlet's knuckles. Archnaris followed. As Keening remained embedded, Sunda swept in a concise arc and struck the heart's lower lobe. Impact produced no audible clang. Rather, the entire chamber vibrated in subaudible pressure. The heart shivered, then stabilized, its amplitude increasing fractionally, transmitting power into the conductor rings of the tonal transference matrix beyond the vault. Cag-Ray-Nak withdrew Keening, inscribed a half-circle slash to decompress residual force, and signaled the architects to shift amplifier frequencies from delta to theta band. Data ducts embedded in the floor captured wave analytics, routing them upshaft to lexicon processors 15 levels above. Metrics surged positive. Phase resonators held within expected variance. No harmonic collapses. For 17 seconds, the impossible became mundane. The Dwemer had opened conduit to the machine heart of creation and found it pliant. Yet thresholds are fragile. On the 18th second, ghost channels, oscillations predicted but thus far suppressed, spiked beyond safe amplitude. The amplifiers registered interference patterns that did not originate from internal equipment. Cag-Ray-Nak perceived a ripple in the vault air, analogous to heat shimmer, but cooler, like unseen ice crystallizing reality's edges. His implant flagged readings inconsistent with lattice predictions. External interference from mass thaumaturgical activity on surface. He realized almost with clinical detachment, that the Chimera had likely initiated large-scale demon chants, calling upon their good Daedra to curse the mountain. He barked orders in clipped tonal code. Architects retuned amplifiers to compensatory bandwidth. Automated ballast pylons at the chamber's rim extended stabilizer rods deep into stone to damp shear. Keening flashed, Sunder realigned. But the heart sensed new variables. Its pulses lost their previous smoothness, developing asymmetrical beat. Like a drumline marred by one unruly percussionist, the entire pattern threatened to dissolve into cacophony. Outside the vault, war had escalated into full siege. From vantage posts secured by sphere sentinels, a vast tapestry unfolded. Chimera, rank formations advancing across scoria flats, while Dwemer artillery mechs lobbed silent compressive grenades that imploded chitin shields without explosive flame. In return, Chimera witch archers loosed arrows sheathed in pale violet fire, each shaft anointed with azuric salt. Upon impact, they detonated clouds of blinding blue light that corrupted Dwemer sensory manifolds. Animunculi staggered like blinded beetles until internal recovery routines purged circuits. High above, ash clouds parted under cyclonic vortices conjured by Nerevar's spell rites. Forked lightning scarred the slopes, one bolt striking a Centurion tower, energizing its capacitors, until the structure overloaded. The explosion cast molten shards across the battlefield, each shard whistling like a torn horn. At the foot of the mountain, Nerevar gathered elite shield companions, Indoril Archon swordsmen, Dress Blight Guard bearing Bone Whip glaives, and Telvanni reagent mages. He lifted his visor, revealing eyes rimmed by bright magicka. For days he had wrestled with dread knowledge gleaned from Cag Renac's diagrams. He believed the heart lay at risk of bondage, and perhaps worse, denial of its rightful place in cosmology. The chimeric cause was no longer border dispute, but metaphysical survival. He raised his voice, calm and resonant, speaking of duty to ancestors. The speech contained no flourish, no promise of divine intervention, only resolution born of unflinching faith. Companions answered with solemn nods and tightened grips. Back in the vault, interference peaked. The heart began generating sideband frequencies that collided with the Mutrar chord, creating dissonant harmonics. The conductor rings of the matrix wavered in rotational speed, one ring lagging half a degree against prescribed spin. This desync triggered failsafe sirens, low pulses perceived through bone more than ear. Cag Renac cursed in clipped Dwemeri. No flowing script, just base numeric expletives signifying systemic error. He commanded Or-El to reinforce stabilizer synchronization. The Centurion extended additional pylons, gears locked. Rotational delta narrowed but remained out of tolerance. Archnaris scrambled to recalibrate Sunder's gyros. She retuned inertia rings, realigned energy recirculators. Meanwhile, Cag Renac accessed subpanel behind Wraithguard's wrist joint, adjusting wave phase dampener to broaden absorption spectrum. The gauntlet seethed with surges so intense its brass skin dimpled outward like hammered foil, only to smooth again. The heart responded unpredictably. Its luminosity deepened from carmine to nearly black. Internal motes of light swirled like captured starfields. A single magenta filament extended toward Cag Renac's chest, not touching, more a gravitational lure than physical tentacle. He felt organ-deep pressure, an attempt at tonal handshake beyond his prior modeling. He faced a decision, abort or proceed. Procedures dictated abort at this variance, but external war jeopardized second attempt. He weighed risk coefficients in microseconds. Logic wavered, influenced by the heart's allure. He recalled tenets drilled since youth. Reality is malleable. Only numbers dictate possibility. Courage lies in refinement of truth. He chose proceed. He signaled architects. Shift to epsilon subharmonics, an emergency set reserved for high flux, recession of unknown variables. Amplifiers complied, singing counternotes that coaxed the heart's filament back. Keening darted forth for secondary incision. The blade parted the ebony glow. At once, the vault floor rippled as if it were water, rings of stone flexing in impossible elasticity. Each architect felt consciousness stretched thin, as though their minds had entered a delay loop, déjà vu layered upon itself. In that same moment, above ground, Nerevar reached the outer shell of Dwemer defenses. Sphere sentinels emerged from burrows, limbs flared. Nerevar's Telvanni mage shattered one sentinel with a sharpened glyph of undead ward, converting life-draining energy into kinetic beam. The creature imploded, scattering brass shards, but more stepped forward. Indoril archons met them with chime blades, silvered edges vibrating to disrupt animunculi servo frequencies. With each clash, harmonic shockwaves rolled across the ash, upsetting battle rhythms. Near Southern Ridge, Vivek strode, then still, a flesh and blood chimer with voice of silk and hidden steel. He sang a passage from the 36 lessons, yet unwritten, his words twisting air into geometric shapes that shielded allies. Sotha Sil, draped in soft cloth woven from midnight and mathematics, conjured shards of raw possibility, glimmering frames within which causality obeyed his whim. For heartbeat intervals, Almalexia, Regal, radiated golden certainty, directing troops with gestures that felt like hymns ascending. Inside, Kagrenak's secondary incision unlocked deeper reservoirs. The heart emitted tone impossible for living ears, an infrasonic syllable that belonged to stars gestating in void. Though unheard, architects perceived it as sudden understanding, a proof glimpsed whole, too vast for retention. Two aids collapsed, neurological overload seizing them. Wraithguard's dampers bled spectral discharge across Kagrenak's arm, leaving lattice of hairline fractures on gauntlet shell. He ignored pain. Stage 2 metrics soared beyond green into unknown white zone. Raw energy spilled along transference conduits, surging up mountain's spine. In Dwemer strongholds miles away, dormant turbines revved spontaneously. In the desert of Hammerfell, Raucan dome lights flared midday bright. Automatons across Tamriel, even those buried by millennia of silt and snow, twitched alive. A sleeping. Machine Empire exhaled, Archnaris shouted. Tone modulators flagged structural shear in Matrix Ring 3. Kagrenak pivoted to instruct reinforcement, but hesitated. Through shimmering heat he sensed shift in Philosopher's compass. The numbers no longer aligned with predetermined endpoints, but pointed instead toward infinite extension. A voice, or rather an idea, whispered without words. Why contain? Why limit? The heart offered not tool, but horizon. With full saturation, the Dwemer could step beyond Mundus into a mania of perfect creation, forging their own domain free of ancestral cycles. He recalculated, glimpsed blueprint of pure thought extruding into matter. Could he refine existences, equations so every Mer, not just Dwemer, might ascend? He believed yes, and so chose to widen funnel instead of cap it. He ordered Ring 3 allowed to spin free, moving from constrained rotational geometry to open harmonic drift. That command passed through control channels. Some architects complied, others quailed. Archnaris cried out, protocol violation. She approached Kagrenak, ready to override by authority of council. Yet in that hesitation, the heart responded, exuberantly, sending surge that vaporized Ring 3's servo clusters. A wave of gold-white force burst outward, ricocheting inside chamber like sun within prism of midnight. Wraithguard took brunt, but both Keening and Sunder heated, their surfaces warping. The explosion's echo rushed up vent shafts, manifesting outside as tremor that rattled combatants. Chimer and Dwemer alike paused as slabs of rock tumbled from cliff faces. Nerevar steadied mount, sensed shift deeper than quake, an ontological lurch in mountain's marrow. He urged advance, convinced moment of decisive stroke had arrived. Beyond, Red Mountain, ripple radiated. In the Somerset Isles, Sijic monks meditating in Sapora Tower gasped, 7 simultaneously snapping from trance. Scrying pools turned mirror black. One monk whispered, "Their hubris has found the hinge." In Skyrim, glacier-throned altars to Kine thrummed as migrating geese fell silent mid-flight. In Cyrodiil, a dreamer awoke weeping crimson tears, repeating, "The deepest door opens inward." Back in the Heart Vault, emergency shutters engaged, sealing corridors leading from outer facility to core, yet battle demanded access. Indoril shock teams reached a sealed brass iris carved with numeric filigree. They placed bone drills tuned to anti-harmonic frequencies, unraveling each layer's resonance code. The iris peeled like petals. Sphere sentinels poured forth. Dress Blight Guard met them with toxin-soaked maces. Clouds of corrosive resin ate at brass joints, but centurions kept advancing until a cadre of magisters erected kinetic domes, trapping them, crushing them under their own weight. Nerevar pushed through breach, followed by Vivek, Almalexia, Sotha Sil, and a phalanx of ward-bearers. Interior corridors glowed emergency crimson. At each vector, they confronted new traps. Gravity wells that flipped corridors upside down, acoustic mirrors that weaponized their heartbeats. But together they pressed on, guided by prophecy, glimpsed by Azura's star-seers. No step was random. Each held echo of predetermined destiny. They reached precipice overlooking Inner Caldera. Through protective spells, they saw conductor rings whirling, pylons canted at perilous angles. Energy arcs leapt between struts. At center, thin, bridge leading to main dais, upon which Cag Raynak labored, Nerevar perceived him not as foe, but as craftsman enthralled by magnum opus. Yet he also saw collapsed bodies of Dwemer aides, smoke curling from armor seams. The heart burned behind, incandescent. Vivek's voice carried like warm wind through desert canyons. He called out to Cag Raynak, citing prior alliance, pleading to cease. Cag Raynak did not turn. He inserted new code plates into Wraithguard's wrist slot, numbers whirling across palm. He answered by formula, not language, expression, intangible. Sotha Sil studied matrix lensing, mouth a thin line. He intuited feedback loops spiraling beyond control. He warned they approached cascade threshold, system energy trending asymptotic. Cag Raynak raised keening for final integration step. Sotha Sil moved to intercept, but Nerevar stepped ahead. Negotiation demanded heart and sword in tandem. He called Cag Raynak's name, once, evenly. The Dwemer architect paused mid-motion. Eyes behind goggles reflected cascade of parameters. For fleeting second, recognition. Nerevar spoke measured plea. Unbind from pursuit before realm tears. Not threat, request. Around them, mountain moaned. Conductor ring 2, warped. Cag Raynak, responded in Dwarven. Translation approximates. Beyond fear's horizon lies continuum unbroken by suffering. I reach. He turned. Nerevar saw he could not dissuade. He signaled companions. A plan older than infiltration took shape. Disable matrix. Spare heart, if possible. Sotha Sil began crafting silencers. Devices folding space into micro-baffles. Vivek prepared Poet Blade, hanging heavy with unspoken stanzas. Almalexia whispered, Invocation, binding household ancestors to warriors present. Dwemer sensors registered. Anomaly. Remaining Centurion escorts retargeted. Air filled with hiss of pressurized steam. Clang of brass fists on basalt. Battle erupted among conductor ring catwalks. Indoril shields deflecting piston blows. Telvanni arrows piercing coolant tubes, releasing clouds of searing mist. Disc-shaped drones zipped overhead, projecting slicing beams that carved through chimer ranks. In one pass, a beam sheared 2 dress guards. Almalexia countered by casting Prism of Dawnlight, refracting beam back into drone, severing its rotors. Nerevar pushed forward along narrow gantry. Cag Raynak stood across dais, cloak sizzling from energy backwash. Heart pulses quickened, each beat creating shockwaves that rippled lava sea. Keening's edge tinged violet beyond white heat. Wraithguard's protective field flickered. With calm equal to Cag Raynak's own, Nerevar advanced. His moonglass shield glowed azure, gift from Azura. Sword drawn, length forged from meteoric glass humming with twilight-born resonance, intentionally tuned to counter Dwemer sonic arrays. He reached edge of dais just as Cag Raynak initiated. Final vector insertion. Keening angled to slot into crystalline fissure. Sunda poised to deliver culminating blow. Nerevar deflected Keening's thrust with upward parry. Sparks of merged energies clanged but produced no sound. Impact consumed by anti-echo fields. Cag Raynak pivoted, fluid movement guided by gyros and muscle memory. Sunda swept horizontal. Nerevar ducked, rolled under hammer arc, counter-thrust toward Wraithguard. Blade struck gauntlet, skidding off inertial barrier. Reverberations surged back, almost numbingly cold. Nerevar staggered but regained stance. Battle between General and Architect was not spectacle of rage, but duel of methodologies. Cag Raynak's motions formed geometric dance, each step aligned with diagram etched into dais. Nerevar's style echoed desert wind and temple bell, unpredictable, yet tuned to cosmic rhythm. They sparred beneath throbbing creations, both striving to steer fate, one toward transcendence, other toward preservation. While duel raged, Sothasil and Vivek executed contingency. Sothasil placed silencers at base of conductor ring pivots. Each device unfolded like metallic lotus, petal receivers absorbing harmonic overflow. Vivek chanted sequence of null couplets, compressing them into physical shards which he hurled at junction nodes. Each shard splintered on contact, birthing pockets of quiet where resonance starved. Conductor Ring 1 slowed. Ring 2 wobbled halved velocity. Archnaris, wounded but conscious, recognized sabotage. She crawled across fractured tiles, activating manual overrides. With final strength, she re-energized Ring 3 via bypass coil, forcing it to counter-rotate, pushing system closer to runaway. Sothasil shouted to Vivek to intercept. Vivek dove, but a Centurion crashed between, blocking route. Meanwhile, Almalexia and Indoril Shield Company repelled waves of drones swarming from maintenance hatches. Almalexia, luminous, stepped into open and sang a hymn older than recorded. Script. Her voice triggered harmonic dissonance in drone chiplates. One by one they convulsed, internal gyros seizing. She lowered voice and they fell, inert. Despite sabotage, the heart's energy swell began outrunning containment again. Cag Raynak sensed threshold. He disengaged from Nerevar with abrupt feint, leapt backward. He raised Keening for second incision. Sunda angled for hammer blow that would bond heart to matrix irreversibly. Nerevar sprinted forward. At identical instant, Vivek cleaved through Centurion, clearing line to Archnaris. He pulled throne knife of glass mythic orichalc, plunging into her panel interface. Circuitry shorted, Ring 3 stalled. Cascading error snowballed. Ring 2 lost sync. Ring 1 jittered. Cag Raynak realized systems slipping beyond salvage, but data glimpsed promised culmination, if only correct countervector applied. He recalculated on instinct, altering incision angle by fractional radian. He drove keening in. Everything changed. Observers on battlefield saw Red Mountain erupt without eruption. No magma, no ash plume. Instead, a sphere of white light expanded from summit, silent and impossibly bright. It accelerated outward, devouring shadow, bleaching banners. 10 heartbeats, day outshone itself. Soldiers froze, not by choice, by physics. Time itself fractured. Some later claimed to review their surroundings in crystalline detail, each droplet of sweat hanging mid-air. Within Vault, Nerevar watched Cag Raynak stand frozen, keening halfway embedded. Sunda hovered millimeters from Heart's surface, halted by the same temporal fissure. Wraithguard's dampers overloaded, lines of molten brass racing across gauntlet. Energy surged down Cag Raynak's arm, wreathing him in white corona. He neither screamed nor smiled, just regarded infinity revealed. Centurion escorts flickered like strobe, frames cycling between presence and skeletal ghost. Architects slumped, frozen in incomplete gestures. Sotha Sil pressed palm to one of his silencers, but it no longer existed in singular state. Petals both open and closed in quantum interchange. Almalexia's hymn ended mid-syllable, note stretched into viscous echo. Then, just as abruptly, light collapsed inward, returning to Heart with soundless implosion. Darkness regained Vault. Conductor rings were gone. No wreckage, no sparks. Dais floor immaculate. Where Keening and Sunda and Wraithguard? Where architects, centurions, animunculi? Only Nerevar and companions remained, breathing, alive amid hushed stillness. Cag Raynak vanished. No blood, no scorch. The heart floated, unchanged yet subtly dimmer, as though surface cooled by fraction. It pulsed slower, almost contemplative. Nerevar steadied stance, stunned. He raised sword, no reply. He approached, nothing hindered. Sotha Sil whispered hypothesis. Dwemer unmade, translated to pattern coextensive with Heart's new quantum state. Vivek murmured lines of compassion for lost race. Almalexia traced blessing sign. Outside, Dwemer armies faltered. Automatons stumbled, powered cores ebbing. In Hammerfell, Rorken domes fell dark, centripetal pumps stalled. In Skyrim, Blackreach's glowing orb flickered out, its spore glitter rained to floor like dying stars. Across Tamriel, wherever Dwemer set gears, silence crept. Within minutes, Dwemer presence extinguished. Citadels emptied mid-fact, cups cooling on tables, scholar tablets mid-calculation. Only machine shells remained, guardians with absent, masters, lullabies unsung. Back in Vault, Nerevar recognized magnitude of what transpired, yet war had not ended. Now crisis matured into void. He and Tribunal gathered, debated Heart's fate. They resolved to secure it, bury knowledge lest misuse arise again. They withdrew, sealing Vault behind labyrinth of wards. Above ground, chimer troops advanced into abandoned workshops, picking paths among extinguished forges. Some wept at marvel now lifeless, others looted for salvage. In time, stories would twist. Dwemer betrayed by gods, annihilated by Heart's curse, or achieved godhood. But in that hour, truth remained silent, preserved in memories of those few present at moment of resonance breach. And deep within Red Mountain, the heart of Lorcan continued to beat, subdued yet inexorable, patient as the stone that surrounded it. Nerevar, Vivek, Almalexia, Sotha Sil carried weight of unknown destiny on shoulders, but the world outside felt the absence, an echo left by people who had tried to rewrite existence and, in doing so, wrote themselves beyond its margins. Mountain winds cooled. conflict tapered into uneasy quiet. Ash drifted, covering fresh scars on glassed earth. Centurions stood sentinel until joint lubricant froze in place and gears seized forever. The great song of the Dwemer fell silent, leaving only distant rumble of magma, reminder of ambition's final echo in caverns now empty but not forgotten, where bronze walls still hum faintly, repeating unheard code that names every Dwemer ever born, calling them home, receiving no answer, continuing still. Ash settled where armies had stood, drifting in languid spirals that coated broken shields, cooling lava rivulets and the unmoving bodies of chimera and automaton alike. Those who survived the moment of blinding light now found themselves among motionless legions of brass. A sphere sentinel that only moments earlier had lunged forward to crush an Indoril spear wall now lay inert upon its side, segmented limbs half unfurled, eyelens dark. Steam vents hissed once, expelled their final breath, and guttered in silence. Across the scarred approaches of Red Mountain, a hush spread so complete that distant dunes could be heard shifting under the weight of returning winds. Warriors, priests, and healers lifted helms, blinked at a sky suddenly bereft of whirling aurorae. In that hush, the world seemed emptied of its beating core. The chimera host, frayed yet unbroken, gathered into wary clusters. Medics moved from form to form, their pouches of hacklelow leaf and burned shell salve nearly spent. They found strange patterns of injury. Dwemer concussive pulses had left no puncture or cut, only blood seeping from ear and nostril. For every slain mer, 2 more sat shaking, unable to speak coherence for hours. A Dres apothecary recorded that her patients shivered as though chilled despite the volcanic heat, describing lingering ghosts of silent chords vibrating in skull and bone marrow. Closer to the breached stronghold gates, Indoril vanguard units advanced with caution, swords low, eyes fixed upon corridor mouths, where last resistance had once poured. They encountered none. Brass doors hung ajar without guardians. Hallway luminaria still glowed, a pale saffron fed by clockwork dynamos that, amazingly, continued cycling even as higher function sentinels failed. Indoril scouts whispered that it felt like trespassing upon an abandoned temple, yet one whose God still stirred in the pillars and floor panels. They bound tattered prayer ribbons to spear hafts, marking their path, unsure whether they sought plunder or penance. Vivek, Almalexia, and Sotha Sil reconvened upon a basalt promontory overlooking the empty forge yards. Their journey back from the Heart Vault had been silent, save for the rhythmic tap of Vivek's staff upon vitrified stone. None had spoken of Cag Raynak's fate, nor the geometry of light that had consumed him. Now they watched embers gutter, contemplating a future hurried upon them with brutal finality. Nerevar arrived last, helm tucked beneath one arm, face grimed by smoke and congealed dust. His eyes, ever searching, held sorrow thinly veiled by duty. He asked first not of victory, but of cost. Indoril dead, Dres wounded, Telvanni spell wards depleted, commanders delivered tallies. The numbers felt abstract against the absence surrounding them. They agreed to a temporary cessation of advance. Chimera banners were planted along a semicircle outside the main foundry gates. Warriors fortified positions with ebony stakes, posted sentries beside inert centurion hulks, lest some hidden failsafe reawaken brass guardians. Scouts roamed citadel perimeters, noting how power conduits still hummed faintly under footplates. The still working machinery unnerved even Telvanni, mechanists. They argued for immediate salvage. If the Deep Elves no longer claimed their forges, why not repurpose for chimera prosperity? Dres war priests countered that no mortal should wield tools forged in pursuit of boundless hubris. Almalexia mediated, reminding all that even in victory, caution remained paramount. The ground beneath still belonged to Red Mountain, whose moods none could master. When dusk stretched across Ashland, the tribunal withdrew to a ridge camp where Nerevar's command pavilion stood. There, under a hidebound canopy inked with Daedric sigils of warding, they debated the fate of the heart, the Dwemer machines, and the very memory of those vanished architects. Sotha Sil maintained that Dwemer essence had not been destroyed. Rather, it resonated into a state misaligned with Mundus, unreachable by normal means. He theorized that they now occupied a self-referential framework, an echo of existence folded outside linear time, like a chord still ringing though the instrument lay shattered. Vivek listened, brow furrowed. He sensed beauty in that idea, yet also peril. What if the echo, restless, sought re-entry? Could it warp the melody of mortal ages? Almalexia cared less for theoretical safekeeping than for the souls left behind. The families of fallen Mer. The villages whose hearth fires grew dim during their lord's absence. Her voice carried warmth laced with iron. Above all, restore stability. Nerevar nodded slow agreement, but kept counsel on one point. He alone among them still carried clarity of vow spoken before Azura's stars. 2 nights later, under the sickle of a waning Secunda, Azura came. She did not descend upon clouds or flame. Instead, the air itself parted within the pavilion, revealing a window of bruise-colored dawn. Through it stepped the Prince of Twilight, lithe, silhouette crowned by a halo of dying suns. Her eyes shimmered an ocean's depth, ancient and fathomless. The tribunal and Nerevar prostrated without hesitation, warrior lords humbled before the Daedra who had guided Veloth across exile's waters. Azura looked upon them with gentle grief. She spoke of balance upset. The Dwemer, in spurning awe, had fractured a necessary symmetry between worship and wisdom. Their disappearance left a hole into which destiny now avalanched. She warned that should the Chimera emulate such arrogance, they too would find themselves eclipsed by the very stars they sought to chart. She lauded Nerevar's restraint at the heart, praising his unwillingness to seize power for its own sake. Yet she foresaw a tangle of choices soon to come. Oaths would fray, promises break, and her children's golden skin would darken into sign of sorrow. The tribunal listened, hearts quickening. Vivek heard poetry disguised as doom. Almalexia, the stern note of maternal disapproval. Sotha Sil, equations hidden in prophecy's cadence. Nerevar lifted eyes and pledged again to guard the heart, to prevent any from bending its pulse to mortal ambition, be they Mer, man, or god. Azura's form dimmed, leaving behind a single mote of azure starlight that drifted into Nerevar's cupped hand before extinguishing. In its glow, he read the irreversible turning of an age. The days that followed became a blur of cataloguing and sealing. Chimera engineers in dust-white robes roved the lower foundries, disabling what remained active. They discovered storerooms of uncooled Ethereum ingots, each brick still resonating faintly. Telvanni mages attempted to shape a small bar into conduit for soul gem experiments. The ingot shattered, releasing a shriek that ruptured every lantern crystal within 50 paces. The mages, now partially deaf, conceded Sotha Sil's edict that no one tamper with Dwemer relics until stable containment proved possible. Ebony reinforced vaults were erected, and a roster of trusted custodians sworn by oath and sigil watched each doorway day and night. Some ruins defied even sealing. Deep under Alfton in Skyrim, collapse of central steamline brought entire galleries down, exposing chambers where bioluminescent fungi formed spiraled glyphs on walls. Glyphs that glowed in patterns eerily similar to Dwemer memory matrices. Nord explorers who breached those caverns decades later would swear the fungi sang in pulses. But no bard could decipher melody before their torches sputtered in steam-thick air. In Hammerfell, the Rorken clan's glass-domed city Volan, Fell stood silent beneath relentless desert sun. Yokudan caravanners approaching its outskirts found sand-polished brass gates ajar. They entered to see streets frozen mid-routine, steam carts idle beside fountains, market stalls piled with obsidian trinkets devoid of merchants. Night brought echoes, footsteps clanking across empty catwalks, though no living being trod them. After 2 guards vanished near a hydraulics tower, the Yokudans sealed the outer archways with spell-wrought sigils, naming the place Natin Anu, the city of howling silence, and vowed never to return. Centuries hence, Redguard scholars trace their forebears' caution to those ghost tales. Back in Resdain, Nerevar summoned clan chieftains to a convocation at the foot of Red Mountain. There, upon a dais made of fused slag and half-melted gears, he unveiled a treaty. No house would exploit Dwemer mechanisms without unanimous consent of the council and approval of the tribunal. Dress legates bristled. Such consensus would be glacial. Indoril prelates supported caution. After all, they held ancestral covenants with the 3 good Daedra, swearing not to repeat heresy of unrestrained inquiry. Telvanni archmagisters, intrigued by hidden possibilities, hedged their assent behind labyrinthine clauses. Nerevar weathered debate until dawn, reminding each speaker that lives already lost demanded they shun short-sighted greed. When votes tallied, treaty passed by narrow margin. In the record tablets carved that day, Vivek later added a footnote. Thus, governance grew not from conquest, but from mutual fear of what conquest had revealed. The tribunal then enacted a second decree. A task force, part scholarly, part sacerdotal, would dismantle or quarantine every active Dwemer engine across the province. Somber processions wound through desolate corridors, reciting measured litanies to dull any lingering tonal traps. Animunculi occasionally stirred, as if remembering commands, but with central coordination severed, they soon froze again. Each disabled automaton received a tiny hex seal upon its brow, the Daedric rune for quiet. Sotha Sil coordinated this operation with methodical calm, inventing dampening crystals that nullified residual vibration when hung in clusters. He alone, perhaps, mourned the intellectual elegance of systems he now suffocated, but he did so with clear-eyed resolve. Where Cag Renak had sought transcendence by mastery, Sotha Sil sought harmony through controlled silence. Months slipped by. The war officially ended in stone-etched accords signed on ash paper within ghost fence caverns, terms delivered to each house by white-robed scribes. Reparations proved meaningless. There were no living Dwemer to pay or be paid. Border watchtowers once manned by brass guardians now hosted chimer scouts. In former trade towns, families moved into vacant apartments, discovering mechanical conveniences beyond imagining. Self-heating bathing pools, light lattice gardens blooming year-round. Some citizens accepted these gifts gratefully. Others muttered that their homes whispered at night, soft ticks of gears still turning inside walls. Meanwhile, rumours of Cag Renak's tools spread beyond Resdain. Breton necromancers whispered of a dagger that could pierce the soul of Mundus. Nibonese alchemists wrote letters to Telvanni towers offering fortunes for a mere shard of Ethereum. Dwemer ruins along Skyrim's Druidak range attracted Nord treasure gangs. Few returned, tongues swollen from echo poison. The fledgling Dureni hegemony dispatched scryers to trace the light that blossomed above Red Mountain, hoping to chart new divination lines. They found interference patterns still clouding their auguries, a legacy of Cag Renak's half-summoned algorithm. Within the inner sanctum of Holla Mayan Monastery, Nerevar and the tribunal commenced long vigils before the heart's hidden ward seals. Vivek composed verses on responsibility, turning guilt into liturgy. Almalexia meditated on love's burden. She prayed for all those who had vanished unwilling into void, even Cag Renak. Sotha Sil dismantled and reassembled his own thoughts, isolating grief from curiosity, chaining each to oppositional axioms. They agreed to guard secret of heart not only from enemies, but from themselves. Yet desires seeded deep rarely die. Soon after treaty ratification, House Dagoth emissaries petitioned Nerevar for stewardship over specific Dwemer sites around Red Mountain. Vorin Dagoth, charismatic and secretive, argued that his house possessed geological expertise essential to monitor vent stability. He pledged loyalty, swore to adhere to treaty. Nerevar, trusting old companion, granted limited oversight of certain lower annexes. This decision would echo across centuries, but at time it seemed prudent, even generous. Seasons turned. Volcanic, ash storms brought nutrient-rich soil to lower Foyadas. Farmers tilled fields where brass trenches once carried coolant water. Under tribunal guidance, irrigation channels were carved, mirroring Dwemer efficiency with organic forms. In place of stone aqueducts stood arched fungus beams, living supports entwined with glowing spores. A new architecture blossomed, half metal memory, half fungal promise, hammer steel married to mushroom cap. The land began to heal. Though in dreams, some farmers still heard clank of unseen gears beneath topsoil. Nerevar spent increasing days on pilgrimage across provinces, meeting with Ashlander tribes who felt excluded by great houses, offering reparative dialogue. In the depths of Molaga Moor, he walked alone among fumaroles, communing with spirits of earth. Journal fragments suggest he grappled with foreknowledge of looming betrayal. He wrote lines such as, "We stand upon hinge of twilight. To turn door outward leads to dawn, inward to ruin." He sent these pages to Vivek, who annotated margins in bright lapis ink, transforming worry into koans. Dawn and ruin are but no reflections on same blade. Almalexia responded with practical counsel. An edict to strengthen civic hospitals, anticipating casualties of disorders yet unnamed. Sotha Sil merely returned a diagram of nested spheres, each smaller one spinning, faster than the last, center marked by empty circle. Dagoth Ur's behavior shifted during this time. While other houses lowered banners of war, his miners dug deeper near Red Mountain, citing ore seams. Reports reached Nerevar of secret chants aligning with ancient tonal frequencies. Sotha Sil's monitors recorded faint resonant spikes from sealed vaults. Vivek urged caution. Almalexia recommended audit. Nerevar planned summit with Vorin Dagoth. The meeting, scheduled yet never held, would instead be prelude to destiny's fracture. For the Dwemer, physical absence became mythic presence. Scholars dubbed their vanishing the disjunction, the brass fugue, the great error. Priests claimed tribunal judgments smote them. Telvanni argued they transcended mortal coil, proving logic could supplant faith. Ashlander storytellers wove cautionary fables. The deep folk dug so far below truth that they fell through to its underside and were eaten by their own reflections. Even among men, tales spread swiftly. Colovian traders spoke of golden automatons, roving border forests, searching for lost masters. Children in High Rock whispered that if you pressed ear to ancient stones, you could hear a clock still ticking toward unknown hour. Imperial savants centuries later would sift ruins and find no conclusive explanation. Theories multiplied. Instantaneous planar shift, divine retribution, catastrophic harmonic inversion, global soul translation. Each scholar found evidence enough to convince themselves. None proved final. Years folded into decades. Nerevar's death came sudden, wrapped in shadowed council chambers and conflicting testimonies. Some said he fell to wounds sustained battling House Dagoth vassals. Others whispered darker, poisoned chalice, treachery cloaked in sacrament. The truth, lost among red candles and curtain of time, left only consequences. Grief rocked the houses. Yet soon, from that fissure, new divinity emerged. Vivek, Almalexia, and Sotha Sil announced to assembly at Temple Canton that they had communed once more with the heart, harnessing its music not to enslave reality, but to embody its most perfect harmonies. They claimed mantle of living gods, tribunal, of mercy, mastery, and mystery, vowing to shepherd Dwemer, for Chima's skin now ash-blue by Azura's sorrow, into enlightened epoch. Many accepted, desperate for meaning after war's horror. Some doubted, calling the three usurpers. Ashlander tribes in particular warned that prophecy of Nerevar's return would one day judge false gods. Yet in city plazas, shimmering fountains proclaimed tribunal's miracles. Vivek walked across water. Almalexia healed plague victims with touch. Sothasil crafted moonlight engines that purified air. The realm, weary bent knee. Across this transformation, Dwemer ruins persisted. Cathedrals of quiet rationality, bones of a vanished people whose names soon blurred in memory. Temple doctrine labeled them the deep unwise, but also appropriated their artistry for glory of new faith. Ebony carapace of a centurion became altar base in a grand chapel, a tonal resonator turned into gong-marking high liturgy. Thus, irony looped, Dwemer craft, forged to outshine gods, now served mortal who claimed godhood. Among scholarly circles, however, a minority preserved admiration. They called themselves the Kine Droning Fellowship, wind-listening colloquists, tracing tonal residues in standing stones. They believed Dwemer's final equation not failure, but key-weighting greater mind. Centuries hence, their scrolls would inspire Yagrum Bagan, last living Dwemer, to re-emerge from corpus halls and share fragments of lost lexicons. Bagan's testimony confirmed nothing, only deepened riddles. He had survived by exile in outer realms, returning to find kinsfolk, gone. Disease gnawed his body. Nostalgia gnawed soul deeper. Under Tribunal's long reign, attempts to revive animunculi ebbed and flowed. Sothasil alone achieved partial success, repurposing chassis as caretakers in his clockwork city. He coaxed memory crystals to store new logic loops, careful not to replicate original lattice that once risked cosmos. A handful of Dwemer apprentices, sworn to secrecy, learned art of micro-resonant inscriptions. They walked fine line between reverence and hubris, for even Sothasil feared second disjunction. When, after millennia, one of these constructs escaped containment and wandered stonefalls in aimless journeys, its echoing footsteps reminded locals of buried dread. They named it Brass Walker. Legends persisted that if ever two such walkers met and exchanged code, the deep folk might stir again. Outside Morrowind, other powers coveted remains. The Alessian Order, in fervour against all unorthodoxy, dispatched holy wreckers to raze Dwemer ruins along heartlands, judging their silent cog altars heresy incarnate. Yet for every gear melted at forge pyres, two more were smuggled to Wayrest, or Ornukan, sold to collectors who prized Dwemer metallurgy's uncorroding beauty. In Reachman clans, artifacts turned into talismans, pendants of polished cogs said to grant cunning. Some chieftains carved them into arrowheads, believing brass hearts would never miss prey. The myth spread, Dwemer steel flies straight as lost time. In Alinor, Sigic scholars argued that Dwemer disappearance indicated fundamental instability in mortal plane. If one people could slip sideways, so might others. They convened convocation upon Artaeum, debating whether tonal science or mystic. Discipline offered surer safeguard. A young adept named Solaris proposed a model of the world song, wherein each culture contributed unique chord. Remove one, and dissonance followed. They sought to map those missing notes, fearing brittleness might grow until another thread snapped. Thus did Dwemer's silence shape even far-flung philosophies. Back in the shade of Ghostfence, centuries after battle's end, pilgrims approached sealed vaults to leave offerings for lost mirror of brass. Some laid brass flowers folded from scrap gear, others sang low laments in minor keys. Temple guards once tried banning such veneration, but Vivek decreed it harmless. Remembrance, he said, does not necessarily equal absolution. Still, he tasked ordinators to monitor for cultic revival. On rare nights, they caught scholars chiseling runes into slag slabs, hoping to resurrect formulae of Kag-Rehnak. Most were fined, a few imprisoned, none succeeded. Yet the heart continued beating, however muffled. Periodic rumblings within Red Mountain unsettled settlements. Mages measuring ley lines detected pulses that waxed and waned on cycles difficult to chart. Some surges corresponded to tribunal rituals, others to unknown triggers. Ashlanders interpreted them as Nerevar's restless spirit, bound by tribunal's broken oath. Temple scribes insisted they were simple tectonics. Sotha Sil alone knew. Amplitude and phase matched deeper fractal patterns. Remnants of Dwemer lattice still echoing across stone. One evening in 2E12, a group of Dunmer cartographers ventured into lower lava tunnels to update hazard charts. They encountered a section of wall shimmering with latent heat mirage, yet when touched felt cool. They pressed harder. The stone parted like water, revealing glimpse of bronze hallway beyond, intact and softly lit. Startled, they withdrew, marking location with chalk rune. When they returned days later, passage had vanished, rock seamless. Their report reached tribunal inquisitors, who quietly excised it from public ledger. But rumour leaked, of doors opening and closing at will, of Dwemer halls not gone but phased. In time, scholars speculated, the entire Dwemer civilization might still persist overlapping mundus, glimpsed only at rare harmonic convergences. Some believed that periods of high auroral activity thinned veil, explaining why certain explorers spoke of hearing humming choirs before corridors swallowed them whole. Whether myth or reality, deep fear mingled with admiration. The Dwemer had, indeed, reached some otherwhere, and from that vantage perhaps watched the world stumble forward, still measuring, still judging, and so history marched on, layering new empires, wars and miracles atop ash of Red Mountain. But in the quiet between events, during lonely watch at city wall, or hush of scholar turning cracked vellum, one might feel faint vibration under fingertips, as though Nirn itself remembered the beat of lost smiths' hammers. In those tremors lives a question with no restful answer. Did the deep folk perish for daring to refine divinity, or did they succeed beyond comprehension, leaving all others to play catch-up in shadows of their departure? The tribunal's star would one day wane, the empire of septims would rise and span continents, dragons would wake, and oblivion gates rend skies. Yet every mortal innovation, every heretical thought cloaked in midnight candle study, carried subtle debt to Dwemer precedent. Their tools of brass and thought carved first proof that myth could be engineered. They built, miscalculated, vanished, and thereby expanded the realm of possibility. Even now, automatons wander forgotten by reason of redundant subroutines, trudging along patrol paths whose original context dust erased. They stop at invisible markers, pivot, continue. Travelers encountering these relics speak of eerie melancholy, machines fulfilling duty for absent masters, as faithful as any hound, as tireless as turning of constellations. Sometimes, when wandering deep mines, a lone prospector hears distant clang echoing, as if mallet on anvil counts out hours beyond mortal calendars. He quickens pace back toward daylight, half fearing, half hoping to glimpse silhouette of copper-skinned artisan adjusting calibration forks in glow of subterranean forge. None ever do. Silence reclaims corridors, yet stone still carries memory of sound. Beneath elder boughs of Valenwood, under cracked ice of Sarthol ruins, in labyrinth heart of Dwemer cities entombed by sea, vibrations linger, faint but measurable. Should some future mind decipher them, perhaps doorways will reopen, exposing what lingers in fold between pulses, where deep elves sing equations to stars unseen. For now, Tamriel endures in the aftermath they shaped. That enduring is story enough, of a people who forswore fear. who traced architecture upon the bones of earth, who sought to rewrite the stanza of existence, and in so doing, erased themselves from the page, yet left ink that still glows faintly when held at just the right angle beneath twilight's last, thoughtful light. Sulphur winds crept through the broken porticos of Mazul Meft, brushing against brass filigree gone green with centuries of condensation. Each gust carried flecks of ash that settled on silent piston housings and the arthritic, gears of spider drones forever locked mid-step. The Dwemer city had not heard a living footfall since the tribunal's engineers welded its outer sluice gates shut, yet the air still vibrated with vestigial hum, thin, intermittent, like the last breath of a long dormant bellows. Down in observation gantries, where steam gauges once flickered their readings for shift overseers, chalk marks in fresh script now traced the pathways of lichens edging across copper panels. These marks belonged to Initiate Gavros Veloth, a Dunmerry ordinator engineer deputized under Sotha Sil's Ghost Fence initiative, whose task was to catalogue dormant automata and, above all, to confirm they stayed dormant. He moved slowly, head bare in the warm gloom, counting his own heartbeats so that any shift in ambient resonance would register as disruption between his ribs. The vault's hush reminded Gavros of a rumour whispered in his academy days, that Dwemer, metals never truly cease singing, even when gears froze from neglect. Professors had called it myth, yet here, amid moth-eaten ledgers and glass tubes quantum etched in vanished alphabets, he could almost discern a lullaby pitched beneath the threshold of ordinary sense. He knelt by a centurion husk, half embedded in rubble, and pressed, gloved palm against the cold plating. The metal felt not dead, but waiting. He registered 0 flux on his arctalimeter, logged the reading, then rose without speaking. Even his breath he measured, one long exhalation for every 4 steps, to avoid incidental harmonies that might reverberate through leftover sensor arrays. Such protocols had been drilled into all members of the Ordinator Custodial Corps, for, in the earliest years after the disjunction, there were incidents. The worst occurred 59 years after Cag Renac's vanishing, in a minor annex beneath Vardenfell's North Caldera. A team of fervent Telvanni prospectors, lured by black market diagrams of a supposedly quiescent tonal inverter, attempted to pry a data coil from its housing. Their pry bar struck ceremonial pitch at precisely the harmonic that reset dormant watchdog routines. 10 brass spiders unfolded from the ceiling, beheading the intruders in synchronized arcs before retracting to their alcoves. Days later, a search party found the miners' torsos stacked neatly beneath a resonator louvre, each body drained of blood by centrifuge needles too small to see with naked eye. Sotha Sil read the report in silent solemnity and wrote a single directive: do not awaken what has chosen to sleep. The ordinance became doctrine, carved in obsidian above every Ghost Fence checkpoint. Gavros concluded his inspection, marking Mazul Meft stable in his ledger. He left the city exactly as he found it, closing final gate seals and affixing tribunal wax sigils that hissed faintly as they cooled. Upon returning to Ghostgate Barracks, he submitted findings to his superiors, glancing once over shoulder. Even outside, he felt the vault's hum trailing behind him like a memory of thunder. The Ghost Fence itself rose year by year, a lattice of giant soul anchors driven into obsidian ridges, connected by a shimmering curtain of magicka bright enough to stain the night sky purple. It began as bulwark against Dagoth Ur's blighted storms, but also served subtler purpose, delimiting the zone where Dwemer relic concentration remained highest. Sotha Sil designed the pylons to resonate out of phase with classic tonal architecture, frustrating any dormant automaton's attempts to align internal gyros. Ordinators patrolled perimeter, sensing for anomalies. Most days their vigil felt ceremonial. No construct shambled near the barrier. Yet once, During first seed of the Second Era's 78th year, a brass sphere rolled down from the volcanic slopes, pinging low notes like a mournful chime as it collided with pylons. Its hull scorched white, shrank inward, then popped, scattering whirring cogs that skittered into ash like beetles seeking shelter. Each cog was collected with tongs, doused in consecrated pelican oil, and locked inside lead reliquaries. The incident proved the Dwemer wake easily when conditions align. Inside tribunal stronghold temples, debates endured. Should these machines be dismantled, harvested for strategic leverage? Almalexia cautioned restraint. Such temptation had already cost the Chimera their skin. Vivek argued that ignorance granted power to ghosts over living. Only through knowing could Dwemer transcend fear. Sotha Sil remained remote, communing in his clockwork city with algorithms disguised as dreams. From there, he issued periodic treatises along polished brass tubes borne by centurion facsimiles of his own making. One early treatise on residual harmonics within disjunctive echoes hypothesized that every functioning automaton locked within Morrowind's crust acted like a tuning peg. Together they stabilized local fabric of reality, preventing heart energy from detonating outward. Remove too many, and tensile equilibrium might loosen. The argument was compelling enough to stay mass reclamation efforts for centuries. Still, curiosity fermented in hidden corners. In Balmora, a guild of academics calling themselves the Lapidary Choir bribed a city administrator to release confiscated gear shards. They believed proximity to Dwemer alloys could expand cognitive capacity. Members wore slivers set in silver chains upon their brows during midnight symposia, chanting polyphonic meditations. Over months, participants reported heightened memory retention, even glimpses of geometric visions swirling behind closed eyelids. Then, in sun's height, 3 members succumbed to violent seizures, their eyes turning bronze moments before death. Medical examiners discovered hair-thin brass filaments growing through brain tissue, each filament etched with ridged glyphs akin to microtonal codes. The tribunal outlawed non-licensed possession of Dwemer scrap thereafter, but fragments continued to pass through black market channels, prized by alchemists and visionaries unchastened by cautionary tales. Beyond Morrowind's borders, imperial, historians wove conflicting tapestries of Dwemer fate. In the Library of Brumer, a Colovian chronicler named Antar Velas drafted The Fall of the Deep Folk, a 14-volume sequence depicting the Dwemer as mad sorcerer kings whose pact with Molag Bal backfired. Velas cited no source beyond dream prognostications, but his lurid text spread like wildfire, shaping Cyrodiilic imagination. Meanwhile, Breton arcanists collected shards to produce miniature automatons, sold as parlor novelties, clockwork songbirds that warbled dissonant lullabies until springs wound down. Across Hammer Fell, Redguard smiths repurposed Rorcan alloys into sword pommels claimed to never nick or tarnish. Yet some pommels hummed at night, harmonizing faintly with desert winds. Such relics fed folk superstitions about singing blades, leading wielders toward buried treasure, and occasionally straight into sandpits, where dormant constructs stirred to fulfill centuries-old patrol subroutines. Amid swirling rumor, only one living being could provide first-hand testimony. Yagrum Bagan, last of the Dwemer, discovered by Sotha Sil, wandering corpus caverns clad in exochair of his own cobbled derivation. Bagan spoke haltingly, voice rasping through inflamed throat, telling of outer realms where time trickled sideways and thoughts crystallized into shapes. He lamented losing entire lexicon of his clan recollections to corpus blight. Sotha Sil crafted curative tonics to slow infection. In exchange, Bagan recorded half-remembered histories onto memory stones, how Kag-Renak's equations resonated with cosmological keystone, how sudden non-presence enveloped his kin, how Bagan, exploring distant pocket dimension, felt nothing but echo of their departure. He provided vector maps of tonal corridors, conceptual diagrams of space folded by song. Yet when tribunal scholars attempted to replicate even simplest path, crystal matrices shattered, replicating flicker of that fateful white sphere, though at reduced scale. Research halted under penalty of spiritual treason. Bagan spent last decades compiling bestiary of Dwemer animunculi, documenting variants unseen since disjunction: aquatic eel drones, sand-skittering shield crawlers, flight-capable hawk centurions. His meticulous sketches revealed redundancies, fail-safes that suggested Kag-Renak anticipated catastrophic system loss, even while forging Keening and Sunder. Perhaps he imagined contingency armies to guide survivors through void. Theories proliferated. Bagan died halfway through captioning Plate 92. His exochair powered down, head bowed like statue succumbing to rust, though metal never corroded. Sotha Sil sealed Bagan's memory stones within a silver reliquary, stamped with the rune of quiet, same symbol placed upon dormant constructs. Some whispers say he visits those stones during solitary vigils, conversing with lost colleague in dreams of brass. Throughout Third Era, imperial expansion under Tiber Septim cast new spotlight upon Dwemer legacy. Septim's envoy, Lord Zur in Arctus, studied incomplete Dwemer schematics in hopes of weaponizing tonal energy. He supervised excavation of Blackreach's central orrery, a globe-sized mechanism believed to simulate planetary epicycles. Arctus ordered test activation, gears rumbled for first time in millennia, and luminescent spores above shimmered in swirling constellations. The orrery conjured illusions of twin moons shifting at unnatural speed, causing local Nords to wail omens of apocalypse. Within minutes, dimensional torsion threatened to collapse cavern ceiling. Arctus disengaged failsafe couplers, halting rotation but losing 8 researchers to gravitational shear. He shut sight, reporting to Septim that Dwemer tech remained too volatile for field adaptation. Secretly, however, he salvaged power cores, almond-sized Ethereum nodes, to fuel early experiments with Mantella device, blueprint of which would one day birth Numidium, the brass golem destined to reshape history. Thus, the Dwemer's long shadow stretched toward Empire's epicenter. Back in Vardenfell, Dagoth Ur awoke beneath mantle of Red Mountain, having lingered half alive since disjunction, nurtured by heart's echoes. He harnessed Dreamsleave transmissions, whispering across ash wastes to recast himself and 6 lieutenants into ash vampires, ghastly caricatures of Mer and Machine. He revivified dormant automatons, grafting blighted sinew onto broken brass, creating grotesque amalgams that marched under scarlet banners. Ghost fence pylons now served both bulwark and imprisonment. Ordinators redoubled patrols, yet each month new breaches leaked corpus monsters into outer lands. Sotha Sil, alarmed by automation corrupted through Dagoth's will, enhanced pylon harmonics, deepening frequency that countered Dwemer meta-signal. But he confided in Vivek that Heart's power grew erratic. Dunmer reliance upon Heart for tribunal godhead would not outpace Dagoth's cunning forever. Automata themselves seemed to sense shifting tides. Ordinators reported Centurion remnants twitching where once they lay inert. In Shadowgate Pass, a chitin caravan stumbled upon Sphere Sentinel imprint lines, etched freshly overnight, though no sentinel was sighted. Moth priests studying Elder Scrolls glimpsed cryptic verses. When silent cities breathe again, clockwork lungs shall fill with sin, and beating brass beneath the sand shall lift a nameless king to stand. Scholars argued the stanza foretold Numidium's eventual reassembly. Others claimed it warned of Dwemer recoalescence from data ghosts. Regardless, tension massed like storm cloud. It was within this strained equilibrium that an obscure Ivriel Septim delegate petitioned tribunal for access to Keening. Imperial archaeologists, she claimed, needed artifact to stabilize Numidian heart replacement. Tribunal refused, citing cosmic risk. Negotiations faltered. Imperial mages turned instead to forging replica using Dwemer alloys illegally purchased from Skyrim smugglers. Replica shattered during trial enchantment, releasing harmonic burst that leveled entire wing of Sankator vaults. Survivors described a soundless shriek and visions of bronze forest shuddering under invisible moon. Emperor's council suppressed incident, but cracks in secrecy widened. Soon rumor reached Dagoth that Heart's keys remained outside Tribunal's person, fueling his resolve to reclaim tools. He deployed Ashgul cadres to infiltrate sealed tunnels, sniffing ancient steam scents for scent of Keening's edge. And Keening, kept in sanctum behind Vivek's palace, sometimes sang soft, yearning notes no ear heard, yet which rippled across temple flagstones, causing candles to gutter. Acolytes reported dreams of endless corridors lined with golden script, each corridor a thought seeking its lost conclusion. Vivek, kneeling before Blade, contemplated writing a new sermon to quell its longing. He feared weapon-recognized approach of purpose beyond tribunal stewardship. Remote from such tension, ordinary Dunmer farmers tilled ash yams in foyadas once carved by Dwemer siphoned trenches. They reused fragmented pipes to channel meltwater. Children played among half-buried spider chassis, stringing kwama eggshells across motionless legs as wind chimes. They told stories that brass guardians would awaken if a falsehood passed between them. Thus children strove for truth in play. Over generations, these bronze relics became fixtures of local folklore rather than menace. Until one rain's hand, morning when an ancient spider jerked to life under weight of toddlers' laughter. Villagers fled as automatons stumbled blindly, performing half-remembered patrol pattern until its steam bladder cracked and it collapsed into puddle of whistling vapor. The incident renewed fear that any day might see return of entire mechanic horde. Temple scholars launched project to develop seal crystals, small magicka stones attuned to disrupt Dwemer energy matrices. They embedded crystals inside prayer idols sold along pilgrim roads. Faithful carried them like talismans. Tests proved promising. When placed near dormant constructs, crystals produced antiphase humming that destabilized residual charge. Yet Sotha expressed reservations. Tampering might accelerate lattice degradation, unravel delicate equilibrium. He suspected Dwemer lasting absence owed partially to stasis fields anchored by still functioning machinery. Destroying anchors might unravel metaphysical knot, inviting larger calamity. Meanwhile, members of Kine Droning Fellowship resurfaced in High Rock as tonal seekers. They claimed to have perfected micro-scale rendition of Dwemer dissolution event. In demonstration before Wayrest dignitaries, they activated Resonator, rod above silver chalice. Chalice vanished, leaving negative imprint in dust. Applause turned to panic when Rod's frequency shifted uncontrolled, disintegrating half the tapestries in hall. Blame fell upon heretical craft. Knights of Court arrested seekers, but Resonator escaped capture, later reappearing in hands of Reachman Shaman near Markarth vaults. This single artifact stirred pockets of chaos across western Skyrim, showing lingering capacity of Dwemer science to reshape mortal life long after its author's silence. Across Tamriel, pieces of the vanished puzzle beckoned to dreamers and tyrants alike, yet each attempt to exploit them ended in partial failure, either self-destruction or escalation beyond control. Other forces took note. Dragons, long slumbering, coiled wings across vision of a future where mortal tinkering with world's underpinnings endangered their own cyclical dominion. Even Daedric princes cast glances. Hermaeus Mora's abyssal scholars recorded swirling auguries that the Dwemer's echo might hold key to knowledge beyond even Apocrypha. For Mora, absence meant potential, pages yet unread. Toward the close of Third Era, events converged around Nerevarine prophecy. A prisoner stepped onto Seder Neen docks, guided by Azura's will. He would reclaim Kag Renak's tools, sever heart from Dagoth and with that blow end tribunal's waning divinity. But preceding that climax, 1,000 lesser stories braided together, each not a Dwemer artifact, each thread of memory humming faintly. In Balmora, Gavros Veloth rose to captain of custodial corps. He trained new recruits in art of listening, teaching them to sense vibration in bones rather than by ear. He composed manuals instructing on null-tone breathing, how to step between heartbeats of slumbering engines. One evening, alone in Tower Archives, he placed palm against a sealed chest containing small oscillator wheel. His journals reveal moment of revelation, then dread. Wheel's frequency matched rhythm of his heartbeat exactly. He wrote, "It is no accident. Either they learned heart from us, or we adapted to their remaining pulse." Next entry ended mid-sentence, as though quill blotted by sudden tremor. Chest later found vacant. Gavros disappeared, last seen walking toward Ashlands under azure twilight, humming unplaceable tune. Some say he joined Dwemer Echo, lost between pulses. Others claim Dagoth enthralled him, for months later, during Red Year, silhouettes of ordinator armor were spotted among ash ghouls, moving with brass flicker rather than flesh. Whatever truth, Gavros became footnote in greater ledger, one more mortal tangled in resonance of vanished voices. Thus, as era after era unfolded, Dwemer influence persisted not as empire, but as question, an unanswered theorem etched across bones of Nirn. Scholars copied copies of Bagan's diagrams, each iteration drifting slightly until original equations blurred like ink in water. Still, essence lingered. In the gear-toothed arch of Vivek's Ministry of Truth, in Sotha Sills, rib-vaulted clockwork universes, in desert glass of Rorken hammers rusting under moons. Every corner of Tamriel carried some relic, some hum, some legend reminding mortals that laws of nature once bent beneath chisel of deep folk, who dared treat divinity as mechanism. Today, travelers crossing Dwemer ruins at dusk remark upon sudden stillness, as though even insects pause out of respect. Wind passes through perforated obelisks, emerging as chord both mournful and oddly hopeful. Those who listen claim to hear fragment of phrase repeating again and again, not quite words, yet meaningful. They compare notes, each swears phrase different, tailored to the listener's secret longing. Priests dismiss it as imagination, but some hold conviction. These whispers form an invitation, an unfinished verse awaiting mortal counter-melody. Whether invitation should be answered remains burden of subsequent ages. For now, brass halls sleep. Steam veins lie dormant, yet gears remain meshed, coated in timeless oil of Aetherius. Should proper frequency one day resonate across them, whether by scholar's quest, tyrant's scheme, or cosmic chance, the whole vast apparatus may shudder awake, seeking master long departed or purpose newly written. Until that hour, Nirn keeps heartbeat steady, mountains rumble, and moonlight glints soft upon half-buried metal, like eyelids of ancient god not quite shut, dreaming beneath the ever-turning constellations it once sought to conquer, awaiting. Next verse of song begun in caverns deeper than memory. Under the cool vault of dawn, when Massa and Secunda still clung to the western horizon like half-closed eyes, an imperial survey skiff threaded the crags of the Sea of Ghosts and made landfall upon the broken jetty of Falbtarts. Ice eddies lapped against barnacled pylons, and the iron air clattered over the hull planks, carrying a smell of salt rot and ancient oil. At the prow stood academic artisan surveyor Secundus Varro of the Arcane University, spectacles fogged, quill poised over a journal bound in fireproof gorehide. Behind him, labour hands unloaded collapsible thormic tripods, a chest of hexagonal scry lenses, and a solitary tonal probe wrapped in felt. The device, forbidden by moribund statutes yet permitted here under discreet order of the College of Whispers, bore the stamp of the late Lord Kagran, the half-effaced signature of a Dwemer, whose given name had long slipped from mortal tongues. Varro's mission, as described in Chancellor Okato's ivory-sealed writ, was to confirm the persistence of residual harmonic lattices and assess their utility for augmentation of the White Gold Tower's void guides. He doubted the Elder Council comprehended what that meant. Most still spoke of Dwemer ruins as repositories of exotic ores rather than temples of folded causality. Yet, if his measurements corroborated private lecturer Cyrieline's hypothesis, Cyrodiil might soon chart shipping lanes through Oblivion shoals rather than braving winter seas. The Crown did not ask whether such lanes should be opened, only whether they could. They advanced with cold lanterns bobbing through corridors long scoured by brine. Thalbtartz's upper galleries resembled a ribcage, arcs of tarnished bronze, interlaced with shards of frost glass. Here, every footfall echoed like a summons to long-departed stewards. Varro lifted his probe, tapped a button, and winced as the device sang a soft A-flat 3 octaves below middle C. Nothing stirred. He turned an adjustment wheel, deepening pitch by 6 cents. From somewhere ahead, a second note replied. Duller, more distant, like a bell rung in heavy fog. His scribes copied readings, amplitude negligible, decay immediate. They hiked onward. Past atriums mummified in rime, the party discovered a transverse pier that, by ancient design, once bridged 2 magma shafts, now clogged with seawater and murk. A collapsed truss revealed a chasm where a dormant centurion lay fused to the floor, caught mid-stride. Its war mask faced skyward, eyes milked to opal by corrosion. Varro felt no pulse of ether. Whatever spark had animated this sentinel fell silent long ago. He motioned workers to extract a forearm plate. As they pried, a trapped bubble of steam escaped with a sigh, warm as infant breath despite centuries entombed. The probe registered faint organomagnetic spin, a statistical ghost of the Dwemer datum lattice. Varro's heart quickened. Proof that something persisted. He ordered instruments assembled beside the sentinel. Copper scry lenses unfolded to form a heptagonal wreath. Artisans chalked transliminal sigils between spikes of barnacle crust. Varro placed probe at center, intoned a series of harmonic integers dredged from Bagan's notebooks. 48 ninths, 10 root 2, tau squared. The air vibrated as though struck by frozen mallet. For a breath, no one spoke. Then, soft and unmistakable, an answering chord blossomed from below the ice fissures, neither A-flat nor any interval found on an imperial monochord. It resembled the false notes produced when anemone crystal fractures mid-transcription. The tone of a sentence whose grammar defied context, eloquent yet hopelessly displaced. The centurion's chest plate warmed. Frost crystals spidered, away. Gears stuttered once, then stopped. Varro signaled to cut power before feedback pulsed, but the cord faded of its own accord. The sentinel resumed inertia. Water dripped. Scribes scribbled. Later, when results were tallied aboard the skiff, Varro realized the return cord contained nested partials corresponding to the harmonic kneecaps of the disjunction timeline, subtones, that had no business existing within a vacuum of silence. He suspected these were echoes of Kagrenak's Mutra cascades still coasting through quantum spaces, bouncing randomly against Dwemer alloys like wind chimes rattling in a house abandoned but not demolished. The discovery bore thrilling consequences. Any artifact properly coaxed might yield embedded instructions or even reconstitute microfragments of superseded reality. Yet excitement soured into dread. A lattice built to maintain equilibrium had endured precisely because it lay dormant. Would further prodding awaken resonant storms powerful enough to buckle seams of known provinces? Varro contributed a cautious report to the university recommending indefinite moratorium on high-gain activation, appended with tables of phase shift anomalies. The council skimmed, nodded, filed his paper behind petitions to fund new legions. When empire weighs knowledge, against advantage caution seldom triumphs. Years rolled into wake and residue of wars, Umbriel's shadow, Oblivion gates, and the waxing of puppet kings. Across this tumult, arcane university archivists continued amassing Dwemer curios like scavengers collecting dragon teeth. They created vault clusters in subterranean ochre wing, each cell dry-lined with star steel to prevent sympathetic hum. Yet whispers of misconduct drifted. Unlicensed apprentices sealed inside cells to meditate on empty air, interns bribing Thirsk whalers for raw gears fused to chitin, a murdered night warden found with skin etched in cuneiform spirals. The parlor of restless silence became notorious among staff. College rumor insisted that if one pressed ear to Ochre Wing's wall after midnight, they might hear gears turning on the other side, though the corridor ended in bedrock. Faculty laughed, yet avoiding night shift became popular. In Caldera, meanwhile, a scholar miner named Thrap Devora unearthed a Dwemery data cylinder half embedded in obsidian. She couriered it, under ordinator escort, to Sotha Sil's Adjunctus, in Clockwork City. There, inside Hall of Resounding Echoes, archivists inserted the cylinder into a translator golem. From its spindle blossomed a projected holograph, lines of golden runes flickering in vertical waterfall. The script described a theoretical second breath of the Dwemer, instructions to reboot collective consciousness if primary physical, matrix collapsed. Key to the process lay not in Heart of Lorcan, but in distributed micro-lexicons hidden inside every animunculus above a certain class, each lexicon containing slivers of cultural memory and parametric schema for self-assembly. By harmonizing thousands of these shards, a sympathetic field might spin into coherence, the way refracted beams converge in a crystal lens. Practically, it suggested the Dwemer never intended to return via incantation or divine favor. They would simply rebuild themselves from fragments when conditions met threshold. Sotha Sil read twice, lips compressed. He filed cylinder in sealed casket, notated margins. If true, our stewardship of these fragments is heavier than any monastery. Bell. Such weight pressed hardest upon Dunmer faithful nursing dwindling confidence in tribunal. After the Nerevarine severed the heart, Vivek retreated into maritime introspection, Almalexia into a spiral of burning certainty, and Sotha Sil into silent experiments. The ghost fence fell, blight storms dissipated, Dagoth Ur became ash and rumor. In the vacuum rose questions older than either godhood or blight. What next? And echoing under that, did the deep folk foresee our confusion? Pilgrims journeyed to ruin portals and prayed among cold pistons, seeking counsel from metal that never lied, unlike mortal thrones. Some reported dreams in which clockwork guardians opened chests to reveal beating hearts of mirror glass. Inside, each heart reflected the petitioner's face transmuted to copper eyes and argent beard. Oracles in Vivek's temple studied these testimonies, declaring them cautionary. The Dwemer show that to ascend without humility is to vanish. Others interpreted hope. The Dwemer show that form can change without loss of self. Imperial ethnographers recorded such tales in polished script, but they also noted a quieter, more pervasive shift. Farmers along Foyadas began equipping mills with refashioned gearboxes, originally carved by Dwemer artisans. Kwama mine overseers repurposed steam lift pistons to raise egg baskets. Over decades, instruments of attempted apotheosis dissolved into everyday convenience. Grand and frightening designs were reworked into water pipes or warming. Braziers. The awe of Dwemer craft, once paralyzing, settled into a shrug of utility. This subtle assimilation, more than any edict, secured coexistence between living cultures and silent forges, weaving brass ghostwork into tapestry of quotidian life, yet assimilation left vulnerabilities. When Fourth Era dawned under Maids, Thalmor spies embedded in Somerset outposts smuggled contraband Ethereum shards from Riften black markets. They studied harmonics, hoping to forge weapons that could silence voices of the Dove. Aldmeri lexicographers cracked partial encoding keys, discovering sequences that modulated gravitational shear. One clandestine test on Oridon flattened a hillock into glass, but subsequent trial triggered implosion of entire lab sphere, erasing all personnel and 14 yards of coastline. Thalmor authorities erased records, yet tremors reached Blades, safe houses. The ghosts of Dwemer once again threaded politics of present day like copper wire through stone. Invisible, conductive, lethal.